Celeste Winslow pressed her lips to Dora Hale's mouth in her upstairs bedroom while her daughter, the woman he was supposed to marry, in less than 12 hours, stood frozen in the hallway below, hands still on the banister, unable to breathe. Not a drunken mistake. Not a moment of weakness, months of secret hotel rooms, deleted messages, and deliberate lies, all while Celeste helped plan the wedding, picked the flowers, and told Brielle she was the most beautiful bride she had ever seen. If this story made your jaw drop, subscribe to our channel right now and drop the name of a city you're watching from. In the comments, I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now stay with me, because what Brielle did next left every single person in that wedding garden completely speechless. The drive back to her mother's townhouse on that warm Savannah night should have taken Brielle exactly 11 minutes. She knew every turn by heart. She had grown up in that neighborhood, had learned to ride a bike on that same stretch of oak-lined road, had come home to that house through heartbreak and celebration, and every ordinary Tuesday in between. The city smelled the way it always smelled in late spring jasmine and river air, and something ancient underneath it all, the way old southern cities hold on to their own particular perfume no matter how many years pass. Brielle was not anxious when she pulled onto her mother's street at 11:41 p.m. She was tired in the specific bone-deep way that brides get tired the night before their weddings, not unhappy, just wrung out from 1,000 small decisions and a week of people needing things from her. The rehearsal dinner had ended 2 hours earlier. She had hugged guests and smiled for photographs and made sure everyone knew where to be and when to be there. She had done everything correctly. All she needed now was the necklace. Her grandmother's necklace, a delicate strand of seed pearls with a small gold clasp shaped like a lily, had been sitting in Celeste's jewelry box for 30 years. Celeste had promised to bring it to the bridal suite in the morning, but Brielle had a specific irrational anxiety about leaving anything to the morning of chaos. She wanted it in her hands tonight. She wanted to sleep knowing it was safe in her overnight bag, wanted to feel that one small thing was settled, so she drove to her mother's house. She parked on the street because there was a truck from the catering company blocking the short driveway, left over from equipment Celeste had stored for the morning after brunch she was hosting. Brielle didn't think anything of it. She was already mentally composing the text she would send Maris, her maid of honor, her closest friend since their second year of college, telling her she had the necklace and everything was fine. She walked up the front path. She used her key, the one she had carried for 15 years. The house was quiet. The front hall light was off, which was slightly unusual because Celeste almost always left it on when she expected anyone to stop by, but Brielle assumed her mother had simply gone to bed earlier than expected. There was a half-full glass of red wine on the kitchen counter. The television in the living room had been left on, volume low, casting a pale blue flicker across the sofa. Brielle went directly to the kitchen first to get some water. The drive had made her mouth dry, and she needed a minute to get her bearings before she went upstairs to find the jewelry box without waking her mother. She was being considerate, the way she had always been considerate, the way she had spent her entire life being careful not to take up too much space or make too much noise, or ask for more than she absolutely needed. That was when she noticed that the back door was unlocked. Not unusual in itself, Celeste sometimes forgot, but something made Brielle pause, glass in hand, and actually look at the room around her rather than moving through it on autopilot. The wine glass had lipstick on the rim, her mother's shade, a warm terracotta that Celeste had worn for as long as Brielle could remember. There was a second glass in the dish rack, washed, but not dried, still damp. Brielle set down her own glass. She stood very still in her mother's kitchen, and something in her stomach went quiet and cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. She told herself she was being ridiculous. Celeste had friends. Celeste was a sociable woman who had people over for wine frequently and without ceremony. It meant nothing that 2 glasses had been used. It meant nothing that the back door was unlocked. It meant nothing that the house felt wrong in some wordless, animal way that Brielle could not explain and did not want to examine. She was tired, she was emotional, she was about to get married, and her nervous system was simply misfiring. She went upstairs. The hallway at the top of the stairs was darker than the kitchen. Celeste's bedroom was at the far end, the door closed. Under normal circumstances, the gap at the bottom of the door would have shown nothing. Her mother turned the lights off when she slept, had always preferred total darkness, but there was light under that door. Faint, warm, the kind that comes from a bedside lamp turned low. And there were voices. Brielle's foot was on the top step. She did not move for a long time. She could not make out words. The voices were low, deliberately low, she understood later, the careful quiet of people who believe themselves to be alone in a house. She could not hear individual sentences. What she could hear was the rhythm of conversation, two voices stopping and starting, one of them her mother's particular cadence, the other one she knew that voice. She had fallen asleep next to that voice for 3 years. She had memorized every register of it. The way it changed when Dorian was telling a story he found genuinely funny versus the performance laugh he used in rooms full of people he was trying to impress. The quieter version he used when he was saying something he actually meant. The careful modulated tone he used in professional settings. The voice behind her mother's bedroom door was the intimate one. Not the professional register, not the public-facing charm. The one Brielle had believed was reserved for her. She stood in that hallway for what she would later estimate in therapy was approximately 4 minutes, though it felt like it was happening outside of time altogether. Her hand was on the banister. She was still wearing her jacket from the rehearsal dinner. She had her keys in her other hand and could feel the small brass teeth of the house key pressing into her palm. She did not go to the door, she did not knock, she did not yell. Something in her, some deep, quiet, self-preserving instinct that she had never fully trusted before, told her to wait. Told her to be still. Told her that the thing she needed right now was not confrontation but information. Because she had learned enough in 28 years to know that caught people lie, and she needed the truth to be undeniable before she made a single sound. So she went back downstairs. She sat down at the kitchen table. And she waited. She could hear the murmur of voices for another 20 minutes. Then silence. Then the soft, deliberate sounds of a house rearranging itself around someone who was trying to be invisible, careful footsteps. The specific creak of a floorboard Brielle had grown up knowing to avoid, the back door opening and closing with exaggerated gentleness. She did not move. She listened to her own breathing. She listened to her mother's footsteps cross the upstairs hallway and stop. She could tell the exact moment Celeste realized the television downstairs was still on. Heard the hesitation, the calculation, the silent weighing of whether to come down. Then the footsteps retreating back to the bedroom. The soft click of a door. Brielle waited 10 more minutes. Then she stood up. She did not go upstairs. She was not ready to look at her mother's face yet. She was not ready to have a conversation she had no script for. She needed something real, something concrete, something she could hold in her hands. She needed to understand what had just happened before she could decide what to do with it. That was when she noticed the tablet. Celeste's tablet, the newest model she'd received last Christmas, the one she carried everywhere, was lying on the kitchen counter beside the dish rack. Screen facing down, Brielle had seen it there earlier and registered it without thinking. But now she picked it up, and when she turned it over, the screen lit up without requiring a password. Celeste had never gotten the habit of locking her devices. She considered herself a person with nothing to hide. The app that opened first was her messages. The conversation at the top of the screen was with a contact saved as simply D. Brielle's thumbs did not shake. She noticed that later. Would think about it for a long time, the absolute stillness of her hands, while the world she knew was collapsing silently under her feet. She scrolled up and further up. The messages went back 9 months. 9 months. She had been engaged for 11. The first messages were casual, almost innocuous if you didn't understand the context. How are you settling in? Did you like the restaurant? You looked wonderful tonight. The kind of messages that could be explained away 100 different ways if you desperately wanted to explain them. But they escalated, quickly. Hotel confirmations. A weekend claimed to be a girls to Hilton Head. The Brielle could now see clearly was something else entirely. Photographs, some deleted, a few still recoverable from the trash folder that Brielle looked at once and never needed to look at again. And the conversations. The conversations were worse than the photographs, because the photographs were just evidence. The conversations were a window into a version of her life she had been living inside, without knowing it, a parallel reality where the man she loved came to her mother's bed and complained about her like she was a problem he was managing, and her mother listened, and agreed, and encouraged, and wanted more. Dorian wrote, "She's gained weight again. She stops trying once she feels comfortable. I don't want to say something and make her self-conscious, but God, Celeste, you always look like you're trying."
Brielle read that sentence in her mother's kitchen at 12:23 in the morning.
11 hours and 37 minutes before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. She read it twice. She read it the way you reread something when your brain refuses to process it. When you keep expecting the words to rearrange themselves into something that means something different than what they clearly mean. Her mother's response was saved exactly as she had typed it. Then maybe you chose the wrong Winslow woman. There was no punctuation at the end. No emoji, no qualifier, just that sentence, sitting there like it had always been there, like Celeste had been waiting for permission to say it for years. Brielle put the tablet face down on the counter. She placed both palms flat on the edge of the counter and looked at the wall. She had grown up in this kitchen. She had stood at this counter and done homework and eaten cereal at 2 a.m. after college exams and cried into this particular dish towel. The night she thought her heart was irreparably broken for the first time. At 19, and her mother had stood next to her and says, "Your heart is not broken. Baby, you are just young and learning how much it can hold." She had believed everything her mother ever told her. She had especially believed the things Celeste said about her body, that it was strong, that it was beautiful, that a man worth having would see her and not her size, that anyone who made her feel small for being large wasn't worth a single minute of her time or a single calorie of her energy. She had held those words up like a shield for years, had repeated them to herself in dressing rooms and on first dates and in moments of terrible 3A self-doubt. Her mother had said all of those things. And then her mother had written, "Then maybe you chose the wrong Winslow woman." The grief that hit Brielle in that kitchen was not the sharp, dramatic kind she had expected betrayal to feel like. It was heavier and quieter. It was the grief of a floor disappearing. The specific devastation of discovering that the ground you built your sense of self on was never solid to begin with. She stayed at the counter for a long time. Then, because she was who she was, and had always been the one who figured things out quietly and handled what needed handling, she picked up the tablet again. She screenshotted every message, every hotel confirmation, every photograph that was still visible. She sent them to her own email in 3 separate batches. Then she deleted the sent copies from Celeste's sent folder, so her mother would not know she had been seen. Then she replaced the tablet exactly where she had found it. Screen down. Dorian, get some sleep. Beautiful, tomorrow begins forever. She stared at the message for a full minute. 3 years of her life had produced this man, this moment, this text message. 3 years of Sunday mornings and grocery runs, and arguments about was to call the plumber and quiet on the porch when she had thought, with genuine uncomplicated happiness, that she was one of the lucky ones. 3 years of believing she was known and chosen and safe. Get some sleep, beautiful. She thought about the way he must have typed it. Probably from his car half a block away. Probably with her mother's lipstick still visible on the collar of the shirt she'd helped him pick out 3 weekends ago. She put the phone in her pocket without responding. Then she called Maris. It rang twice. Her friend answered on the second ring with the slightly breathless quality of someone who had not been asleep, probably still winding down from the rehearsal dinner, probably lying in her hotel room watching something on her laptop. "Bri, is everything okay? It's almost 1 a.m. I'm fine," Brielle said. And she was surprised to discover that she mostly meant it, in the specific way that shock sometimes grants a person temporary exemption from the feelings they will have to pay for later. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything." "Okay," Maris said. And her voice had already shifted into something quieter and more careful, because she had been Brielle's friend for 9 years, and she could read the weather of Brielle's voice the way some people read sky. "I'm listening," Brielle told her. "Not all of it. Not the worst details, just the shape of it, Dorian's car, the voices, the tablet, the messages, the sentence her mother had written." She kept her voice level. She sat at the kitchen table and spoke quietly into the phone while the house was silent above her. When she finished, Maris was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Tell me you're getting in your car and leaving. Tell me you're going back to the hotel. Tell me I need to start making calls." "The wedding is still happening tomorrow," Brielle said. Maris made a sound that was not quite a word. "Just not the marriage," Brielle said. Another silence. "I know what I'm doing, Maris. I need you to trust me, and I need you to do exactly what I'm about to ask you without arguing. Can you do that?" A long pause. "You know I hate it when you get calm like this," Maris said. "It's genuinely terrifying, I know," Brielle said. "Are you with me?" "I am always with you," Maris said. "You know that. God help me, I am always with you," Brielle exhaled. She started talking. She was specific and methodical and thorough, which was what she was by nature, what her job required, what years of managing other people's chaos had trained her to be. She went through what she needed. She told Maris about the marriage license, and what she needed Maris to do in the morning quietly, without drawing attention, without giving anything away. She explained about the photographs and the envelope she wanted to prepare. She thought through the timing. She thought through the variables. She thought through the ways it could go wrong and the ways she could manage each of those. "You're not going to forgive him quietly," Maris said slowly. "Working through it, you're not going to confront them tonight. You're going to let them think everything is fine. And then I'm going to give them the morning they believe they deserve," Brielle said. "And then I'm going to take it away from them." She heard Maris breathe. "Brielle Louise Winslow," Maris said softly, "I have loved you since the second year of college, and I want you to know that tonight, even on the phone, you are absolutely terrifying, and I mean that as the highest compliment I have ever given you." Despite everything, despite the weight of what she was carrying, Brielle almost smiled. "Get some sleep," she said. "We have a lot to do tomorrow." She left her mother's house without taking the necklace. She would wear a different piece of jewelry. She did not need anything borrowed from Celeste. She drove back through Savannah in the hour after midnight, the streets quiet and fragrant, the moss hanging from the live oaks like gray curtains in the dark. She drove the way she always drove, 2 hands on the wheel, eyes forward, speed limit observed. She felt extraordinarily, unnervingly awake. She was not going to cry tonight. She made that decision consciously, deliberately, the way she made every important decision. She would grieve when she could afford to grieve. Right now, she needed her mind clear and her hands steady and her face composed. She had work to do. When she got back to the hotel, she sat on the edge of the bed she had been too excited to sleep in earlier, the beautiful suite she and Dorian had booked because the day was supposed to be the most important day of her life, and she opened her laptop. She began making arrangements. Some were small, some were significant. She worked carefully and quietly, the same way she had always worked, the same way she had always handled the things that mattered most, with precision, with patience, with a thoroughness that left no important detail unaddressed. At some point after 2 in the morning, she thought about the dress. It was hanging in the closet across the room in its garment bag, the zipper sealed, the hem protected by a soft cloth cover she had pinned herself. The dress she had spent 3 months being afraid of. These 3 months standing in fitting rooms, sucking in air she didn't need to hold, watching her reflection in mirrors that felt like judges, listening to the small poisonous voice in the back of her mind that had asked, over and over, whether a woman her size was allowed to wear something this beautiful. She had bought it anyway. She had stood in the fitting room and looked at herself and thought, "This is the dress," and then the voice had said, "But are you the body for it?" And she had bought it anyway, which was one of the bravest things she had done in her adult life. And she had never quite let herself feel proud of that, because pride in her own body was something she could never entirely locate when she needed it. She got up, she unzipped the garment bag, she looked at the dress for a long time in the quiet of the hotel room, and she made another decision. She was going to put it on tomorrow. Not for Dorian, not for the guests, not for the photographs or the venue or the long floral centerpieces Celeste had insisted on. She was going to put on that dress because she had earned it, because she had chosen it when the choosing was hard, and because nobody, not her mother, not her fiancé, not the voice in the back of her own mind, was going to turn the day she wore it into the day she became someone who disappeared. She zipped the garment bag back up, she set her alarm. She lay down on the hotel bed without changing out of her clothes and stared at the ceiling in the dark. Her phone buzzed one more time, Dorian again, 3 words this time. "Love you, beautiful." She turned her phone face down on the nightstand. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. But when she finally did, her hands were still and her breathing was even and her face was calm. And in the morning, when the alarm went off and the day she had planned for, both the day she was supposed to have and the day she had chosen instead, began to arrive, she sat up without hesitation. She showered. She did her makeup with care. She had coffee sent up from the hotel kitchen. She sent Maris a single text message. "I'm ready, are you?" Maris replied in under a minute. "Sealed and ready to go, you tell me when." Brielle looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She thought about her grandmother's necklace, still in her mother's jewelry box. She thought about the tablet still on the kitchen counter, screen down, holding its secrets. She thought about Dorian in his groomsman's suite on the other side of the hotel, probably laughing with his friends right now, completely certain he was about to get away with everything. She thought about what her mother had written. "Then maybe you chose the wrong Winslow woman." Brielle picked up her mascara wand. "No," she said quietly to her reflection. "He chose exactly the right one." Then the knock came at the door. The sound of it made Brielle go perfectly still. She knew that knock. She had known that knock her entire life, 3 deliberate taps. A pause, then 2 more. It was a habit so deep that Celeste performed it without thinking, had done it on every door of every room Brielle had ever occupied, from childhood bedroom to college dorm to apartment to this hotel suite. Brielle had found it comforting once, now her stomach simply dropped. She waited 4 seconds, then she opened the door. Celeste was dressed beautifully, of course she was. She was wearing the ice blue wrap dress she had bought specifically for the wedding. Her hair pinned in the soft updo she always wore for formal occasions, pearl earrings at her ears. She was carrying a small velvet box, the necklace, Brielle realized, and a cup of coffee from the hotel lobby, because that was the kind of thing Celeste did. The small, thoughtful gestures that had always made her seem like the model mother, the coffee and the earrings and the remembered details. She looked, Brielle thought distantly, exactly like a woman who had nothing to hide. "Good morning, my beautiful girl," Celeste said, and her voice was warm and her eyes were bright, and she stepped forward to hug her daughter, like a woman who had slept peacefully and dreamed of her daughter's hat. Brielle let her. She stood inside her mother's embrace and felt her mother's arms around her shoulders, those smells Celeste's perfume, same fragrance for 20 years, and let none of what she was feeling cross her face. "Good morning, Mom," she said. Celeste pulled back and held her daughter's face in both hands, the way she had done since Brielle was small. "How are you feeling?" "Are you nervous?" "I feel ready," Brielle said, and that was true. She had never been more ready for anything in her life. Celeste beamed. She held out the velvet box. "I brought Grandma's necklace." "I know I said this morning, but I thought—" "I know you did," Brielle said. She took the box, she opened it and looked at the pearl strand and the gold lily clasp. She felt the weight of it in her palm. She looked at her mother. "Mom," she said carefully, slowly, her voice entirely level, "is there anything you want to tell me? Before today? Before all of it begins?" Celeste's expression softened into something that looked like genuine emotion, and maybe some part of it was genuine. That was the complicated thing. Maybe some part of Celeste felt the question land, felt some echo of what was right and true press briefly against the door she had closed and locked against it. But the door stayed closed. "Only that I am so incredibly proud of you," Celeste said. "And that your father would be too." Brielle looked at her mother for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she smiled. "Thank you, Mom," she said. She put the velvet box on the vanity. She would not be wearing the necklace. She had already chosen something else. But she let her mother believe the morning was going exactly as planned, because Brielle had learned something essential in the kitchen of her childhood home at 12:30 in the morning. If you show people what you know before you're ready to use it, they will take it from you. She was not ready yet. She would be ready at the altar. Maris arrived 20 minutes later with the sealed envelope in her bag and a look in her eyes that was equal parts love and barely controlled fury. She hugged Brielle at the door and held on for an extra second. "You doing okay?" Maris murmured against her shoulder. "I am doing exactly what needs to be done," Brielle said. "Help me get into this dress." Maris pulled back and looked at her. Really looked at her, the way only a person who has known you for 9 years can look at you, reading everything behind your eyes. Cataloging the things you're not saying, measuring the distance between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are. "Okay," Maris said finally, "let's get you dressed." The photographer arrived. The hair and makeup team finished their work. The morning moved forward with the specific inevitability of wedding mornings, that momentum that builds itself and carries everyone along, whether they are ready or not. Brielle stood in front of the full-length mirror in her wedding dress. She looked at herself for a long time. She was still plus size. She was still the same woman who had spent 3 months being afraid of this dress. Her body had not changed overnight into something she had been taught to consider more acceptable, more worthy, more deserving of the beautiful and the celebratory. She was exactly who she had always been, and she looked exactly the way she intended to look. Not despite herself, not in spite of anything, not as a consolation prize or a compromise or an act of defiant self-acceptance that required constant maintenance to sustain. She just looked like herself, and she was done apologizing for that. And today of all days, she was going to walk into a room full of 250 people and take up exactly the amount of space she occupied. No more and absolutely no less. Her phone rang. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey," he said warmly. "I know we're not supposed to talk. I just wanted to hear your voice." "I'm glad you called," Brielle said. "I have a question." "Anything, babe." She kept her voice soft and easy. conversational, like a woman checking a minor detail before a big event. "Are you absolutely certain," she said, "that I'm the woman you want?" A short pause. Not long enough for guilt. Just the half-second pause of someone recalibrating their response. "Brielle," Dorian said warmly, "there has never been anyone else." She heard him say it. She heard the smoothness of it, the practiced ease, the complete and total confidence of a man who had said the right thing so many times it had stopped requiring effort. She heard it and she filed it away. "I'll see you at the altar," she said. She hung up. She looked at Maris, who had heard enough from across the room. Maris held up the envelope. Brielle gave one small, precise nod, then she picked up her bouquet and turned toward the door. 250 people were waiting in a garden in Savannah, Georgia. Her mother was already there. Her fiancé was already there. The officiant was already there. The photographer was already recording. Everything was exactly where she needed it. Brielle straightened her shoulders. She walked out the door. The morning of the wedding arrived the way all important mornings do, not dramatically. Not with any particular ceremony, just light coming through curtains and an alarm going off, and the ordinary world reassembling itself around a woman who was no longer ordinary in any way that mattered. Brielle had slept 4 hours, maybe less. She had lain in the dark and listened to her own heartbeat and thought about 9 months of hotel rooms and deleted photographs, and a woman who had looked her in the eye every single day of those 9 months and chosen, over and over again, to keep lying. 4 hours was enough. She had made her decisions, now she had work to do. She was in the shower by 6:15. She was dressed and had coffee in her hand by 7. She had already sent Maris 3 separate texts, each one precise and organized, laying out the adjustments she needed made before the ceremony. Not requests, logistics. The way Brielle had always approached the things that mattered most, with the steady, methodical focus that her colleagues at work called her superpower, and that she had always privately thought of simply as survival. Maris had responded to each one within minutes, no arguments. No attempts to talk her out of it. Just done. Already on it, and I love you and I am going to need you to eat something before this morning kills me. That last one made Brielle almost smile. Almost. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed and picked up her phone and looked at the string of messages from Dorian. The good morning text from 6:47, warm and easy and completely unburdened by conscience. The voice message from 7:10 where she could hear his groomsmen laughing in the background. And Dorian saying into the phone, "Hey beautiful, just wanted to hear your voice, big day. Best day, call me when you're up." The follow-up text from 7:22, "You're probably in hair and makeup already. You're going to be stunning. I can't wait to see you." She read every single one. She did not respond to any of them. She put the phone face down on the nightstand and went to look at her dress. It was still in its garment bag, hanging on the back of the closet door, where Maris had positioned it the night before, with the reverent care of someone handling a battle standard. Brielle unzipped it slowly. She pressed her palm flat against the fabric, the smooth, heavy weight of it, the way it held its shape without apologizing for taking up space. She had been afraid of this dress. She had stood in the fitting room 6 weeks ago and had the specific, soul-crushing experience of hearing her own brain tell her she didn't have the right body for it, that it was designed for someone smaller, that she should choose something safer. She had bought it anyway, and standing in that hotel room in the quiet of the early morning, she made herself remember why. Not because of Dorian. Not because of the 250 guests or the photographers or the floral arrangements Celeste had spent 3 weeks arguing about. She had chosen this dress because for one moment in that fitting room she had looked at herself, really looked, not through the filter of every mean thing she had ever been told or quietly thought about her own body, and she had thought, this is exactly who I am. She was going to wear it today for exactly that reason. Not to be beautiful for anyone else, because she had always been allowed to be beautiful for herself. Maris arrived at 7:45 with the sealed envelope tucked into her bag like a live grenade, which was essentially what it was. She came through the door and looked at Brielle, and for a moment neither of them said anything. They had known each other for 9 years. They had been through the particular gauntlet of female friendship, the fights and the reconciliations and the 2AM phone calls and the hospital waiting rooms and the moves across states and the relationships that failed and the ones that didn't. They had built the kind of knowledge of each other that doesn't require words for most things. This required words. "How are you actually doing?" Maris said. Not a question, a door held open. "I am doing what I decided to do," Brielle said. "Which is the only answer I have right now that isn't going to make me fall apart." So please let's keep moving. Maris nodded. She set her bag down carefully. She did not push. Okay, hair and makeup are setting up in the other room. Your aunt called twice. I told her you were resting. Good. Your cousin Leandra texted asking if she can do a TikTok before 10 this. Absolutely not. That's what I told her. Maris paused. The photographer is here. I briefed him. Brielle looked up. What did you tell him? I told him there might be an unexpected moment during the ceremony and that his job was to keep recording no matter what he saw or heard. I told him it was important for the family record. Maris met her eyes. He thinks we're being sentimental. Good, Brielle said again. Let him think that. The hair and makeup team arrived, and the morning took on the particular momentum that wedding mornings generate, a kind of forward-moving energy that doesn't leave room for second-guessing, because there is always something that needs doing right now, always someone who needs an answer or a decision or a reassurance. Brielle let herself be moved through it. She sat in the chair and felt the familiar ritual of it, the brush, the powder, the careful work of hands that were professional and gentle and entirely uninvested in the drama happening inside the woman they were working on. She was grateful for that. She let her face be worked on and thought about nothing specific and breathed. At 9:20, her phone rang. She saw the name and felt her stomach tighten. She picked up on the third ring. Good morning, Mom. Good morning. My love, Celeste's voice was warm and bright and completely, devastatingly normal. I'm about to leave for the venue. I just wanted to check in. How are you feeling? Completely ready, Brielle said. And she kept her voice soft and even, and gave it the slight tremor of happy nerves that Celeste would expect, because Brielle had spent 3 years managing complex logistics at work, and she understood that the most important part of any plan was not the execution but the setup, and the setup required that every variable believe the morning was going exactly as anticipated. Oh, baby, Celeste said warmly, you're going to be so beautiful. Dorian is going to absolutely, Mom, Brielle said carefully. Can I ask you something? A small pause, just a fraction. Of course, anything. Did you sleep okay last night? The pause this time was longer. Not long enough to be obvious, but long enough for Brielle to hear it, to measure it, to file it away next to every other thing she had filed away in the last 12 hours. I slept wonderfully, Celeste said smoothly. I went to bed early. Actually, I wanted to be rested for today. Brielle said nothing for 3 full seconds. That's good, she said finally. I'm glad you rested. After she hung up, Maris, who had been pretending to check her phone in the corner of the room, looked up. She lied to your face, Maris said quietly. On the phone, on your wedding morning. I know, Brielle said. I want you to know that I am holding myself together with the strength of about 400 women right now, Maris said. I know that too, Brielle said. Keep holding, the morning continued. Relatives arrived at the bridal suite in small clusters, the way they always do at weddings. Her Aunt Patricia, with her relentless cheerfulness and her stories about her own wedding 30 years ago. Her cousin Leandra, who kept trying to find an angle for the TikTok despite being told no twice. Her father's sister Renee, who had driven from Charleston at the moment. She walked through on Day, kept touching Brielle's face and saying, you look exactly like your daddy, which was the one thing that almost broke Brielle completely because her father would have known. Her father would have seen through every lie in that room without being told a single word. She kept her composure. She accepted the hugs and the tears and the photographs and the small, well-meaning intrusions that are the tax of having people who love you. She was present and warm and gracious and gave nothing away. Years of managing difficult situations at work, of sitting across from people who needed things she couldn't always give and finding a way to be human about it anyway, had built in her a capacity for this kind of controlled performance that she had never fully understood as a skill until today. At 10:50, Maris pulled her briefly into the bathroom. She closed the door. She looked at Brielle. The license, she said quietly. Handled, Brielle said. Maris exhaled. You're sure? Because once we walk into that venue, Maris, Brielle met her eyes. The marriage license will not be filed today. That is already done. Whatever happens at that altar, I will not legally become his wife. That is the one thing I needed to be certain of before anything else. And I am certain. Are we clear? Maris looked at her for a long moment. We are clear, she said. Good, now fix my lipstick. It smudged on the left side. They walked back out. The cars arrived at 11:15. Brielle got in the second car, the one designated for the bridal party, and sat in the back seat and watched Savannah move past the windows. The city was doing what it always did on warm spring mornings, opening itself up, the streets filling with the particular, unhurried energy of a Saturday, Tourists and locals and people with no particular destination, all moving through the Spanish moss-draped squares with no awareness whatsoever that something significant was about to happen in a garden estate less than 2 miles away. The city did not know, the city did not care, the city would be exactly the same tomorrow as it was today. And somehow that was both devastating and deeply comforting. Maris was in the seat next to her, holding the envelope in her lap with both hands. "You doing okay?" Maris asked. "I'm going to ask Miss once," Brielle said quietly. "At the altar, I'm going to give them one real opportunity to tell me the truth. In front of everyone, and if either of them actually tells the truth, I will walk away quietly." No scene, no envelope, nothing. Maris stared at her. "You would do that?" "I don't think they will," Brielle said. "But I need to be the kind of person who gives them the chance. Because if I don't, I'll spend years wondering whether they might have chosen differently." Maris was quiet for a moment. "And if they lie?" Brielle looked out the window. "Then they made that choice," she said, "not me. The garden estate was everything it was supposed to be at the height of a Savannah spring, and Brielle registered none of the decorative details, noticed none of the arrangements that had consumed weeks of planning and thousands of dollars, and an almost comical survey of commerce calls about centerpiece height. What she registered were people, 250 of them, filling the white chairs in neat rows, dressed in their spring finery, buzzing with the specific social energy of a crowd that has assembled for a celebration. She could see them through the gap in the estate entrance as the car pulled around. She could hear the low, warm murmur of it, that particular pre-ceremony sound, half party and half church. She saw Dorian's family in the front rows. She saw her own relatives scattered through the crowd. She saw Celeste. Her mother was standing near the front, speaking with the efficient, with the comfortable authority of a woman who has been central to the planning of this event and wants everyone to know it. She was wearing the ice blue wrap dress. Her hair was perfect. From this distance, across this garden, she looked like exactly what she had always presented herself as: the devoted mother, the gracious hostess, the woman who had raised her daughter to believe she deserved the world. Brielle watched her for exactly 3 seconds. Then she turned away. One of the groomsmen knocked on the car window. He was grinning. He gave her a thumbs up. She smiled back at him with the full warmth of a woman who was deeply happy today. Because she was a woman who was deeply certain today, which she had learned in the last 12 hours, was actually better. She got out of the car. Maris was immediately at her side, the envelope deep in her bag, her expression composed and professional and completely opaque. Whatever was happening inside Maris and Brielle knew enough to know it was considerable was staying there. For now, for her, ready? "One more thing," Brielle said. She took her phone out. She opened her texts. She found Dorian's last message that easy. "Unburdened, I can't wait to see you," and she read it one final time. Not because she needed to, because she wanted to remember exactly what it felt like to read a person's words and know with complete certainty that every syllable was a lie. She wanted to remember this feeling not as pain, though it was pain. It would always be pain, but as information, as the specific, clarifying truth of what this man had always actually been. Then she put the phone away. "Ready," she said. The processional music began. The bridesmaids went first, one by one, down the aisle that wound through the garden estate between the rows of white chairs. Brielle could hear the shift in the crowd sound as each one appeared, that soft, gathering attention, the whispered exclamations, the rustle of people turning in their seats. The photographer was in position. She had confirmed it. Then it was her turn. Celeste appeared at her side from the entrance of the estate, because Celeste was walking her daughter down the aisle. Her father was gone. Her mother had been the logical choice, the loving choice, and Brielle had agreed to it 8 months ago without a second thought. Now Celeste was standing next to her, taking her arm, her eyes bright with genuine-looking tears. "This is it," Celeste whispered. "My baby, I am so proud of you." Brielle looked at her mother's face. She really looked. She studied every feature with the specific attention of someone who is committing something to memory, not because she expected it to change, but because she needed to understand it. This was her mother's face when her mother lied. Not dramatically different from her mother's face at any other time. That was the thing. That was the thing she needed to understand and hold on to. "Thank you for everything you've done," Brielle said. "I mean that." And she did mean it. She meant it the way you can mean something and also know it no longer saves the person you're saying it to. The music swelled. They stepped through the entrance. 250 people rose. The crowd stood. And the sound of it, that collective movement, that gathered breath, hit Brielle physically. Like something with weight, she walked. She kept her shoulders back and her chin level and her eyes forward. She walked the way she had decided she was going to walk, which was not the walk of a woman who was afraid or broken or diminished, which was the walk of a woman who knew exactly where she was going and had chosen to go there. She saw Dorian at the altar before she was halfway down the aisle. He was watching her with the expression she had fallen in love with, that specific, particular look he had, the one that made you feel like you were the only person in whatever room you shared with him, like his entire focus had narrowed to you and nothing else existed. He was good at that look. She understood now that he was very, very good at it. He was smiling. She smiled back. She walked past her relatives without looking at them. She walked past Dorian's parents, who were both crying. She walked past the rows and rows of people who had come from different cities and different parts of her life to witness what they believed was going to be a marriage. She walked all the way to the front. Dorian took her hands. His hands were warm. They were always warm. She had loved that about him. "You look incredible," he said quietly, leaning slightly toward her. Just for her, the intimate register, "I knew you would." She held his gaze. "Thank you," she said. The officiant began. He was a kind man, a friend of Dorian's family who had been ordained specifically for this ceremony, who had met with them twice for premarital counseling, and told them over coffee that they had what he called the real thing. He spoke warmly and unhurriedly, the way officiants do when they are genuinely fond of the couple, and the crowd is receptive and everything seems to be going exactly right. He spoke about commitment, about the particular courage it takes to choose someone in a world full of uncertainty, about the way love at its best makes you more yourself rather than less. Brielle listened to every word. She held Dorian's hands and listened to a man talk about the courage of real love, while the woman who had spent 9 months betraying her stood 12 feet away in an ice blue dress and wept quietly into a handkerchief. Then the officiant reached the traditional moment. If anyone present knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, Brielle released Dorian's hands. The movement was small and deliberate, not a dramatic gesture. Just a quiet, clear uncoupling, her hands sliding out of his and returning to her own body, her own space, her own control. The officiant paused. Dorian's expression shifted fractionally, the first crack. Just a flicker, just the briefest rearrangement, gone before most people caught it. "I have one," Brielle said. Her voice was calm. It was not a shout. It did not need to be. The garden had the specific acoustic quality of outdoor spaces that go completely silent, every sound carrying further than it would indoors, every word landing in the open air with unusual clarity. 250 people stopped breathing at the same time. Dorian stared at her. She turned to look at him fully, the way she had been practicing in her mind since 12:30 in the morning, with the specific quality of attention that makes a person feel genuinely seen, which was, she had come to understand in the last 12 hours, the most powerful thing you can give someone: real attention. The full weight of your gaze. "Where were you?" she said. "At 11:48 last night?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Dorian's face moved through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, calculation, recovery, and then the familiar configuration of his most reassuring smile, the one he used when a deal was sideways and he needed to bring a room back. "Babes," he said quietly, in the careful, de-escalating tone of a man who has talked his way out of things before. "Let's not do this here. Whatever you think, I asked you a question," Brielle said. Still calm, still exactly as loud as she needed to be. "Where were you at 11:48 last night?" He held her gaze. "I was with the guys, you know that." She nodded slowly, as if she were considering this. Then she turned. She looked directly at her mother. Celeste's face had gone the particular color of a person who has just understood that the floor is about to disappear. "Mom," Brielle said. In the crowd, 250 people turned to look at Celeste Winslow in her ice blue dress. Celeste's mouth opened, closed. "I was home," she said. Her voice was not quite steady. "I told you I went to bed early." Brielle stood between them. She looked at her mother. She looked at Dorian. She gave them both a moment of absolute silence in which the truth could have been told, in which either of them could have chosen differently, in which the entire trajectory of everything that came next could have changed. "I'm going to ask you both once," she said. "Tell me the truth right now. Just tell me, and I will walk away from this altar quietly, and we will handle the rest of it privately, and you will never have to stand in front of these people and account for what you've done. One chance, right now." Neither of them spoke. Dorian glanced at Celeste. That glance lasted approximately 1 second. It was the most honest thing he had done all morning. Brielle saw it, half the garden saw it, and in that 1 second, the shape of everything became clear to anyone who had been paying attention, the way two people, who share a secret in a room full of witnesses, communicate in the fraction of time between one heartbeat and the next. Brielle turned to face the crowd. "My maid of honor has something for me," she said. Maris was already moving. She came forward from her position in the bridal party, her face composed, her bag open, the envelope in her hand. She held it out to Brielle with the steadiness of a person who has been told exactly what this moment would cost and has decided to pay it anyway out of love. Brielle took it, she opened it, she looked at Dorian. "I'm not going to read all of it," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not going to stand up here and read every message, every hotel confirmation, every photograph. I'm not going to do that to myself, and I'm not going to do it to the people who came here today because they care about us. I am going to read enough, and I am going to let the facts speak for what they are." Dorian took one step toward her. "Brielle, don't," she said, one word, level and absolute. He stopped. She looked down at the pages in her hand. She began to read, not from the beginning, not the early messages that could still, theoretically, be explained away. She started at month 3, where the language had stopped being deniable. She read the hotel confirmation date, location, the name the reservation was made under, which was not Dorian's name but a variation of it that she recognized immediately as the name of his college roommate, the one he claimed to have visited twice in the past year for work. She read 3 messages that established the pattern clearly, that showed the planning involved, the deliberateness, the months of sustained deception that could not be excused as impulse or mistake. She heard the crowd. The sound of it was remarkable, not screaming, not the dramatic uproar that you might expect from a television version of this moment. Real collective shock sounds different. It sounds like 250 people discovering simultaneously that the ground under their feet is less stable than they thought, and reacting with the specific stunned quiet of people who need a moment to recalibrate reality. Then she got to the message. She had saved it for this point deliberately. She found it on the page. She looked at it. Then she looked at her mother. "Dorian sent my mother a message in January," she said. "He told her he was unhappy with me. He said She paused. And this was the only moment in the entire morning where her voice changed, where the control thinned just slightly, just enough to let the humanity through. "He said I had stopped trying, that I had gained weight and stopped trying." The crowd was completely still. "My mother's response," Brielle said, was 4 words. She looked at the page. She looked at Celeste. She wrote, "Then maybe you chose the wrong Winslow woman." The silence that followed was not like the silences before it. It was deeper. It was the silence of a room full of people who have just witnessed something that cannot be unseen, cannot be taken back, cannot be softened by context or explanation or the passage of time. It was the silence of a thing that is simply undeniably true. Celeste made a sound, not a word before words, something that came from a place so far below the level of social movement and practiced composure that it surprised even Celeste herself. Brielle could see that, could see the moment her mother's face stopped performing and simply broke. "Dorian moved first. She came to me," he said, and his voice had shifted entirely out of the warm, controlled register of the ceremony into something harder and more defensive that Brielle recognized as his cornered voice, the one she had heard once before in a very bad argument about something that now seemed impossibly small. "I want to be honest about that." She pursued this. I know I should have. "That is not what you told me," Celeste said. Her voice cut through the garden like something physical. She was looking at Dorian with an expression Brielle had never seen on her mother's face before, and Brielle had seen her mother angry, had seen her mother hurt, had seen her mother in every emotional register she possessed. This was something new. This was a woman who had just been told in front of 250 people that she was going to be made into the villains of a story she was survived, and the fury of it was complete and unmediated and enormous. "You told me you loved me," Celeste said. "You told me that after the wedding." Celeste Dorian's voice sharpened. "You told me you were going to figure it out. That was the word you used. Figure it out. Like I was a problem you were going to solve after you got the marriage out of the way." "That is not what I said." "I have the messages," Celeste said. "I have all of them. You don't get to stand there and tell me what you said and didn't say when." She's holding them in her hands. Brielle raised one hand. It was a small gesture. They both stopped. The abruptness of it, the way 2 people in the middle of a rapidly escalating confrontation simply fell silent at the movement of one woman's hand, said more than anything else that had happened in the last 10 minutes. It said something about who had the actual power in this garden. It said something about who had walked in prepared and who had walked in believing they were safe. Brielle lowered her hand. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the faces of people she had known for years, her aunt, her cousins, the colleagues she had invited, the friends from different chapters of her life who had traveled to be here. She looked at the face of Dorian's mother in the front row, who had her hand pressed over her mouth and her eyes full of something that was not quite tears and not quite shock, but some terrible mixture of the two. She looked at all of them, and then she said the thing she had decided to say. "I didn't put on this dress today because I was still planning to marry him." Her voice was steady, clear. It carried to the back of the garden without being raised. "I put on this dress because I chose it when it was hard to choose it. Because I spent months being told by him, by the voice in my own head that I now understand had other people's words in it, that my body wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough, that I needed to be smaller or quieter or less in order to deserve something like this." She smoothed the fabric of her dress with one hand. "I put on this dress because neither of you gets to turn the day I wore it into the day I disappeared." She removed her engagement ring, took her one moment to unclasp it from her finger. The ring was beautiful. She had loved it. She set it on the ceremonial table with a sound that was almost inaudible, just the small, precise click of something being put down and let go. She turned to face the guests. "There will be no wedding today," she said. "But there will also be no woman walking out of here ashamed of being betrayed." She picked up her bouquet. She looked one last time at Dorian, who was standing with his hands at his sides and his face doing something she had no name for. She looked one last time at her mother, who was standing with tears running through her carefully applied makeup, not attempting to stop them, looking at her daughter with an expression that contained, Brielle thought, and would think about for a long time afterward, something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Not yet, not nearly yet, but somewhere under the performance and the desperation and the self-justification, the smallest, most fragile beginning of it, she did not speak to either of them. She turned back to the aisle and she walked. The first person who stood was Renee, her father's sister, who rose from her seat in the third row with the quiet, definitive movement of a woman who has made a decision. Then the woman next to her stood, then 3 people in the row behind, then more, cascading backward through the garden, not loud, not with cheering or applause, simply see rising, the way people rise for something they need to acknowledge even when they don't have the words for it. Brielle did not look back. She kept her chin level and her shoulders back and her eyes forward, and she walked down that aisle the way she had always wanted to walk through her own life, not waiting for permission, not begging to be chosen, not making herself smaller so the space around her would feel more comfortable for other people. She walked out of the garden and into the morning. Maris was at her side before she reached the estate entrance, slightly breathless, having navigated the front row faster than seemed physically possible. "I've got you," Maris said. "Not a question, not a speech, just the simple, total fact of it, I know," Brielle said. They walked to the car together. Behind them, the garden was no longer silent. The sound of 250 people trying to process what they had just witnessed was building into something complicated and layered voices. Movement, the particular acoustic chaos of an event that has departed completely from its script. Brielle could hear Dorian's voice somewhere in it. Raised now, the controlled register fully gone, she could hear Celeste. She could hear other voices she recognized trying to manage what was happening. She did not stop. She did not turn around. She got in the car. Maris got in beside her. The car pulled away from the garden estate, and the driver, who had been hired for the happiest day of someone's life and had clearly understood within the last 15 minutes that something had gone profoundly sideways, drove in absolute silence toward the hotel. Brielle sat in the back seat. She put her bouquet on the seat beside her. She looked at her left hand, at the indentation where the ring had been for 8 months. She was still wearing her wedding dress. She was still in full bridal hair and makeup. She was driving away from a garden full of people through the streets of Savannah, Georgia, in the middle of a Saturday morning in a gown that had cost her more than a month's salary, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not relief, that would come later, but it wasn't here yet. Not grief, that would come later too, in waves with a power she was not fully prepared for. What she felt right now, in the car, in the dress, with the indentation on her left hand and Maris sitting next to her not saying a word, was a very specific, very quiet kind of clarity, the kind that comes from telling the truth out loud in front of people who needed to hear it. The kind that can't be taken back once it exists. The kind that changes the shape of a person permanently, not in the way catastrophe changes people cracking and breaking, but in the way fire changes certain seeds. Making the growing possible. Maris, she said. Yeah, I'm going to need you to stay tonight, obviously, Maris said. I'm not going anywhere. Brielle nodded. She looked out the window. Savannah moved past, unhurried, exactly the same as it had been an hour ago. Okay, Brielle said quietly. She leaned her head back against the seat. And for the first time since 11:48 the night before, she let herself breathe. The hotel room was exactly as she had left it that morning. The coffee cup she hadn't finished was still on the nightstand. The garment bag was still hanging on the closet door, open now, empty. The extra throw pillows Maris had stacked on the chair in the corner because she always did that in hotel rooms, always created a small domesticity wherever she landed, were still there in their neat arrangement. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 6 hours ago when Brielle had walked out of this room in a wedding dress with 250 people waiting for her. Everything was completely different. Maris closed the door behind them, and Brielle stood in the middle of the room in her gown and did not move for a long moment. She was still holding her bouquet. She realized that distantly, the way you realize small physical facts when your mind is occupied with something much larger, that her fingers were still wrapped around the stems, that she had carried it all the way from the garden to the car to the hotel elevator to this room. This collection of white peonies and garden roses that someone had spent careful hours assembling for a wedding that was not going to happen. She set it on the desk. She sat down on the edge of the bed. Maris sat in the chair across from her and said nothing, which was the right thing to do and which was one of the reasons Brielle had loved her for 9 years. Maris understood the difference between silence that needed to be filled and silence that needed to be respected, and she had always been able to tell which one she was sitting in. This was the second kind. Brielle sat on the edge of the bed in her wedding dress and looked at the wall for a long time. Then she said, I need to get out of this dress. Okay, Maris said. She stood. She helped Brielle with the buttons down the back, the long row of them that had taken the seamstress 10 minutes to fasten that morning. Working in patient silence, when the last button came free, Brielle stepped out of the dress and Maris held it and then laid it across the chair with a care that was instinctive and automatic, the kind of care that exists because Maris was a woman who understood that some things deserved gentleness even in hard moments, especially in hard moments. Brielle put on the hotel robe. She sat back down on the bed. She looked at her phone. 37 missed calls, 62 text messages, 3 voicemails. The calls were from Dorian, from Dorian's mother, from her Aunt Patricia, from 2 cousins, from 3 numbers she didn't immediately recognize, and from Celeste 7 times from Celeste, which Brielle saw and registered and did not respond to. Not yet, not tonight. She put the phone face down again. Tell me what's happening, she said to Maris at the venue. Maris hesitated. Tell me, Brielle said. I am not fragile. I need to know. Maris exhaled. Okay, my phone has been going off since the car. Leandra says it's chaos. Dorian's family left almost immediately after you did. His mother, apparently, she confronted him in the parking lot. Leandra doesn't have the specifics, but she said it was loud. She paused. Celeste is still there, or she was 20 minutes ago. She was sitting in the front row after everyone else started leaving, and she just sat there. Brielle said nothing. Your Aunt Patricia is furious, Maris continued, not at you, at them. She told Leandra she always thought something was off about Dorian, and she wants to know why nobody listened to her. Which, for the record, she never actually said anything to anyone, so that's a revision of history, but now is not the time. No, Brielle agreed. It's not. Renee called me, Maris said, and her voice shifted slightly. She's not angry. Maris stopped and pressed her lips together for a second. She said your father would have been proud of you. And I want you to know that I almost lost it completely when she said that. So Brielle felt it move through her, the specific, particular grief of a name that's no longer living, her father. Who would have known, who would have sat in that garden and read every face in the room and understood everything without being told a single word, because he had always been that kind of person, the kind who saw. She breathed through it. Okay, she said. Her phone buzzed again. She looked at it. Dorian. She stared at his name on the screen for the full duration of the call, which was 7 rings and then voicemail. She did not answer it. She did not block it yet either, because she was not ready to make permanent decisions tonight. She was not ready to make any decisions tonight except the one she had already made, which was that this night was for surviving and not for resolving anything. Then a text from him, Brielle, please, I know you don't want to hear from me. I just need you to know that what you saw, what was in those messages, it doesn't represent how I feel about you. I love you, I have always loved you. Please just let me explain. She read it twice. She put the phone down. He's texting, she said flatly. Of course he is, Mara said. He says he loves me. He says it doesn't represent how he feels. Mara said nothing for a moment. Then, carefully, what do you need right now? Brielle thought about it. Food, she said. I haven't eaten since 6 this morning, and I think my body is starting to notice. Maris reached for the room service menu immediately, with the focused purpose of a person who has been given something concrete to do and is deeply grateful for it. She called down without looking at prices, ordered more food than 2 people could reasonably eat in a single evening, and hung up with the kind of authority that Brielle had always admired in her. Maris moved through logistical problems the way water moves through small spaces, quickly and without drama. While they waited, Brielle's phone rang again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer, Brielle. The voice on the other end was a woman's, older, careful. This is Sandra Hale, Dorian's mother. Brielle went very still. She had known Sandra Hale for 3 years, had sat at her Thanksgiving table, had received a birthday card from her every year, handwritten, with a personal note, had genuinely liked her, which now felt like an additional wound. Small but real, Mrs. Hale, Brielle said. I need you to know, Sandra said. And her voice was not the warm social voice Brielle knew from dinner parties, but something stripped of that layer entirely, something more fundamental underneath it. I need you to know that I had no idea. None. And I understand if you don't believe me, and I understand if you don't want to talk to me ever again, and both of those things would be your right. I couldn't let the day end without telling you that what he did was inexcusable, and that the woman who stood up in that garden today was the most dignified human being I have ever watched in my life. Brielle was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said finally. I confronted him, Sandra said, and there was something iron in her voice now, in the parking lot. He tried to explain it to me. I'm going to tell you what I told him, which is that there is no explanation for this. There are only choices people make, and those choices tell you who they are. A pause. I am so sorry for my son's choices, for what that woman did to you. Her own daughter. I am so sorry, Brielle. She hung up a few minutes later. Brielle set the phone on the nightstand. She realized her hands were shaking slightly, which was the first time all day that her body had done something without her permission. She looked at them. She pressed them together in her lap and held them there until they stilled. Dorian's mother called, she said. Maris looked up. What did she say? That she had no idea, that she's sorry? Brielle paused. I think she meant it. I think she probably did, Maris said quietly. The food arrived. They ate on the bedroom service trays balanced on their laps, the television on in the background with the volume low. Some home renovations show that neither of them was watching, but that filled the room with the specific comfort of ordinary sound. They ate more than either of them expected to. Brielle discovered she was genuinely hungry, the animal hunger of a body that had been running on adrenaline for 14 hours and was now cashing in the debt. It was around 8:30 when Brielle finally cried. Not a performance, not the clean cinematic tears of a woman in a movie. The real kind, the uncontrolled, ungainly, total body kind that comes when the last layer of control finally dissolves and the thing you've been holding back all day arrives all at once. She cried so hard she couldn't catch her breath. She cried with the specific violence of someone who has been very precise and very measured all day, and whose body is now demanding equal time for the opposite of precision. Maris put down her fork and moved next to her on the bed and didn't say a word. She just stayed. She put her hand on Brielle's back and stayed. It lasted about 20 minutes. When it was over, Brielle sat up and took 3 deliberate breaths and accepted the tissue Maris handed her. I'm going to do this a lot, Brielle said, not quite a question. Yes, Maris said honestly, you are, okay, but not always this much at once. It gets distributed eventually. That's the thing about grief, you think it's going to arrive all at one time and just end you. But it actually spreads out, little ambushes, smaller ones. Maris paused. That's not necessarily comforting, I realize. No, Brielle said. But it's true, and I'd rather have true. That night, after Maris finally fell asleep in the second bed at around midnight, Brielle lay awake in the dark for a long time. She thought about her mother. Not with anger, not right then. The anger was there, it was absolutely there. It was a real and legitimate thing that she was not going to minimize or perform her way past, but underneath it was something more complicated and more painful, which was grief of a different kind. The grief of a child for a parent who turned out to be more broken than you understood. The grief of discovering that someone who built you also, quietly and over a long period of time, chipped away at the very parts of yourself they were supposed to be protecting. Her mother had said, "Then maybe you chose the wrong Winslow woman." She had not said it in anger. She had not said it in a moment of carelessness. She had typed it deliberately, in response to a man's contempt for her own daughter's body, and she had sent it, and she had meant it. And then she had come to the bridal suite that morning and held her daughter's face in her hands and called her beautiful. That was the part Brielle kept returning to. Not the betrayal of the affair was enormous and devastating, but it was at least, in a terrible way, comprehensible. People lost themselves to things they shouldn't want. People made catastrophic choices under the pressure of loneliness and vanity and fear. Brielle didn't excuse it, but she could, at some cold remove, place it in a category of human failure she understood existed. What she could not easily place was the morning, the coffee, the velvet box with the pearl necklace, the hands on her daughter's face. She lay in the dark and thought about the particular complexity of being loved badly by someone who also, genuinely in their own limited and broken way, loves you. She did not resolve it that night. She wasn't supposed to. In the weeks that followed, the world rearranged itself around the shape of what had happened, with the particular thoroughness that public events have when they occur in front of enough witnesses. 250 people had been in that garden. 250 people had phones. The story did not go viral in the way some things do. There was no video. The photographer had been careful and professional and had given Brielle full ownership of everything he recorded. But the story moved through social circles and extended families with the speed and completeness of something that cannot be contained by discretion once it exceeds a certain number of people. By the following Wednesday, Dorian had moved out of the apartment they had been planning to share. He sent a moving company on Tuesday for his things while Brielle was at work, which she had told him he could do, which was the correct and only thing she was willing to allow. He left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter that she found when she got home. She read it standing at the counter, still in her work clothes. It was 2 pages. He was sorry. He had never meant to hurt her. He was going through something he still didn't fully understand, and he had made choices he would regret and he needed her to know that what he felt for her had always been real, even alongside everything else that happened, and he didn't expect her forgiveness, but he needed her to know. She put the note in the kitchen drawer. She made herself dinner. She did not cry. The following Saturday, she was standing in her kitchen making coffee when her phone rang, and it was a number she recognized after a moment as belonging to one of Dorian's groomsmen, Marcus, who she had always liked, who had been quietly kind to her at every event and who had, she now understood, spent the last 9 months having no idea what his best friend was doing. She answered because she was curious. "Brielle," Marcus said, and he sounded exhausted, the way people sound when they've been carrying something heavy. "I'm not calling on his behalf. I want to be clear about that. I'm calling because I was there and because I've known you for 3 years and because I need to tell you something." "Okay," she said. "He told me this morning, everything, not because he wanted to, because I pushed him." Marcus paused. "I pushed him because the way you stood up in that garden, the way you handled yourself, I've been thinking about it for a week, and I couldn't just not say anything. You deserved better than what he gave you, and I'm sorry I didn't see it coming." "I'm sorry none of us did." Brielle sat down at her kitchen table. "I appreciate you saying that," she said. "He's in a bad place," Marcus said carefully. "Not that it's your problem. It's definitely not your problem. But I thought you should know his being in a bad place is a consequence of his choices," Brielle said. Not harshly, just clearly. "Yeah," Marcus said. "It really is." She was in therapy by the end of that first month. Not because anyone pressured her, she made the appointment herself. The week after the wedding, because she understood clearly that what had happened was not a simple wound and that simple wounds were the only kind she trusted herself to treat without assistance. She had spent enough of her life believing she could manage everything quietly and alone. She was done with that particular brand of self-sufficiency. Her therapist was a woman named Dr. Anita Ferrara, who was in her mid-50s and had a specific quality of directness that Brielle found immediately clarifying. In their 3rd session, Dr. Ferrara said, "Tell me about the message." "Your mother's message," Brielle told her. Dr. Ferrara listened without interrupting. Then she said, "When you read it that night at your mother's kitchen counter, what was the first thing you felt? Not the grief about the affair. The first thing you felt specifically about those words." Brielle thought about it. Like I'd been right all along, she said finally. Tell me what you mean by that. I spent years since I was about 15 wondering whether my size made me less valuable, less desirable, less deserving of the things other women seemed to get without question. And people told me over and over that I was wrong to think that. My mother especially. My mother told me over and over that my worth had nothing to do with my body. She paused. And when I read that message, my first thought wasn't that she'd betrayed me. My first thought was she actually agreed with all of it. She agreed with every mean thing I ever thought about myself. She just waited for the right moment to confirm it. Ferrara was quiet for a moment, and now she said, "Now I'm trying to figure out the difference between a truth and something that felt like a truth, because someone I trusted said it. That, Doctor," Ferrara said, "is exactly the work." The calls from Dorian continued for 3 weeks after the wedding. She did not answer any of them. At the end of the 3rd week, he sent a box of white peonies, the same flower from her wedding bouquet, which she understood was intentional, which she understood as a gesture he probably considered meaningful and romantic, and she returned the box to the split note, asking that they be donated to whatever hospital or nursing home they worked with. The florist sent her a thank you card. The flowers from Celeste were different. Her mother did not send flowers. She did not send letters. Not in the first month. She sent one text 2 days after the wedding that said only, "I need you to know that I am not asking anything of you right now. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I just need you to know that I am here when you are ready, and if you are never ready, I will have to accept that." Brielle read it. She put her phone down. She was not ready. She did not respond. Some family members were not subtle about their opinions. Her Aunt Patricia called twice to tell her that what she had done at the wedding was brave, but that the family was suffering from the exposure and that perhaps a quieter resolution might have been possible. Brielle's listened both times with complete patience and then said the same thing both times, which was, "Aunt Patricia, I love you and I am not going to talk about this with you. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss?" The second time, Patricia said, "You know, you were always too stubborn for your own good." "Possibly," Brielle said. "I'll see you at Christmas." She went back to work the Monday after the canceled wedding because she decided that routine was not betrayal and that continuing her life was the point, not the postponement of it. Her colleagues were kind in the practiced, slightly careful way of people who are aware of a situation but unsure of the protocol for addressing it. She helped them by being entirely normal, returning emails, running her meetings, solving the particular operational problems that her job generated daily. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job, and the continuity of it was, in the first few weeks, one of the only things that felt solidly real. 2 months after the wedding, her phone rang late on a Thursday evening. She was on her couch, halfway through a book she had been meaning to read for 2 years. Finally reading it. She picked up. It was Celeste. Brielle stared at her mother's name on the screen. She answered on the 4th ring. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Celeste said, "I didn't call to defend myself." "Okay," Brielle said. "I called because I've been sitting with what I did for 2 months and I needed you to know, not to make myself feel better. I understand I don't get to do that, but I needed you to know that I understand what I did. All of it, not just the affair." The other part, Brielle waited. "I wrote that message because I was jealous of you," Celeste said. And her voice was very quiet and very careful, the voice of someone choosing each word with the awareness that none of the available words are adequate. Not of you and Dorian specifically, of you. Of being young and being chosen and being at the beginning of something. "I was 53 years old and terrified of becoming invisible, and your fiancé told me I was beautiful, and I let that matter more than anything it should have mattered more than." A pause that stretched long enough to breathe in. "And when he complained about you, I didn't defend you. I competed with you, and that is the thing I am to have to live with for the rest of my life." Brielle sat on her couch and held the phone and did not say anything for a long time. "I'm not ready to talk about forgiveness," she finally said. "I know," Celeste said. "I'm not asking for that. I don't know when I will be. I know that too." Another silence. "Mom," Brielle said, and the word came out with a different weight than it had carried in years, not the easy, automatic weight of a word used so many times it loses its meaning, but the heavy, specific weight of a word you say when you are choosing to say it. "Yes," Celeste said, "I'm going to need a long time." "Take it," her mother said. "Take whatever you need. I'll be here." She hung up. She sat for a long time after. The conversation did not fix anything. She had not expected it to. She had not woken up the next morning with the complicated calculus of what she and her mother might or might not one day build somehow resolved. What she had was something smaller and less tidy than resolution, just the first acknowledgement. The first word that was not a defense or an excuse or a performance of remorse, but something that sounded tentatively and incompletely, like an actual human being trying to tell the truth. It was not enough, but it was the first thing that could eventually lead to enough. In the meantime, Brielle's life continued. She accepted a project expansion at work that she had been hesitating on for months, telling herself she'd been waiting for the right time, understanding now that she had actually been waiting for a feeling of settled permanence that her relationship with Dorian had kept her believing was coming. It was not coming from outside her. It had never been going to come from outside her. She bought a pair of shoes she had been standing in front of in a store window for 2 months. Bright, expensive, impractical for anything except wanting them. She wore them on a Tuesday to the office, and her assistant, a 24-year-old woman named Joy, stopped at her office door and said, "I'm obsessed with those. Where did you get them?" And Brielle told her and felt something small and genuine unlock inside her chest. She started swimming again. She had swum competitively through college and had stopped somewhere in the early years of her career, the way adults stop doing the physical things they love because life reorganizes itself around the practical. She rejoined her gym's lap pool. She was in the water 3 mornings a week by her 3rd month post-wedding, moving through it with the specific meditative quality that had always made swimming feel less like exercise and more like conversation with the quietest part of herself. She traveled alone to New Orleans in October 5 days. No itinerary beyond a few restaurants she had identified and a jazz club she had wanted to see for years. She ate beignets at a wrought iron table at 7 in the morning and felt the specific, uncomplicated pleasure of being a person in a beautiful city with nowhere to be and no one to be it with. She had thought solitude would feel like punishment. She had spent years in relationships partly because the alternative, being alone, being just herself, being sufficient without someone else in the frame, had seemed like a verdict about her worth. It felt like nothing of the sort. It felt like waking up. She called Maris from a cafe on the 2nd night. "I'm not lonely," she said, slightly amazed by the information. "I know," Maris said. "I thought I was going to be lonely. I thought being alone was going to feel like evidence of something." "It's not evidence of anything except that you're a person," Maris said. "Which you always were." Brielle ordered another coffee. "I'm buying the most ridiculous pair of earrings tomorrow," she said. "I saw them in a shop window today. They're enormous and green and completely impractical." "Get them," Maris said. "I'm getting them," Brielle said. She got them. She wore them the day she got back from New Orleans. And she wore them to the meeting with her regional director, where she formally accepted the operational lead role on the company's new expansion initiative in Asheville, North Carolina, which would require her to relocate within 6 months and which she accepted without hesitating. She had been hesitating on things for too long. She was finished with that. The move was arranged for March. She found an apartment she liked from the listing photographs and flew up for a weekend to walk through it and sign the lease, and she stood in its empty rooms and felt the specific, quiet thrill of a space that contained nothing yet except possibility. She called her father's sister Renee on the way back to the airport. "I'm moving to Asheville," she said. "Good," Renee said immediately. "Fresh start." "I want to be clear that I'm not running away from anything," Brielle said. "I'm moving towards something. I know the difference," Renee said. "And so do you. That's the point." She spent the weeks before the move going through the apartment systematically, making decisions about what to keep and what to release. She gave away the wedding dress to a nonprofit that repurposed formal gowns for women who couldn't afford them. She held it for a moment before she put it in the donation bag. The dress had done what it needed to do. It had carried her through one of the hardest days of her life with her chin up and her shoulders back. It had held her in its way. She did not need to keep it to remember that. What she kept was a photograph not from the wedding, but one taken by Maris about a week after on a perfectly ordinary Thursday, when Brielle had come home from work and was standing in her kitchen, making dinner, and Maris had come over unannounced and taken a photo without telling her. In it, Brielle was laughing at something she couldn't even remember what. She was in her work clothes, her hair slightly out of order, the kitchen behind her entirely domestic and ordinary. She looked like herself, not the curated version, not the wedding day version with the careful hair and makeup and the dress she had been afraid of. Just herself, laughing, alive, taking up exactly the space she occupied and not apologizing for a single inch of it. She framed it. She packed it with the first things she put in boxes for Asheville. The night before the movers arrived, she sat in the empty apartment furniture already arranged for pickup. Walls bare, rooms echoing slightly with the hollow quality of emptied spaces, and she thought about what she was carrying with her and what she was leaving behind. She thought about Dorian, whom she had not spoken to since the flowers, whose life she had heard fragments of through mutual acquaintances that she mostly did not seek out. She thought about her mother, with whom she had exchanged 3 more brief, careful phone calls in the months since the first one, none of them long, none of them resolved, all of them carrying the tentative quality of something that was not yet a thing and might one day become one. She thought about the woman who had stood in a garden in Savannah in front of 250 people and said, "Neither of you gets to turn the day I wore it into the day I disappeared." She had not disappeared. She was, in fact, more fully present in her own life than she had been in years. More visible to herself, more certain of the specific, non-negotiable value of who she was and what she deserved and what she was and was not willing to accept from the people once in her life. She had not needed to become thinner to arrive here. She had not needed to become harder or colder or more defended. She had not needed to become anyone other than exactly who she had always been. She had just needed to stop asking people who were incapable of honesty to tell her the truth about her own worth. She got up, she checked the windows one last time. She picked up her bag and her keys and walked out the door of the apartment she had been afraid to leave. Anne turned off the light and pulled the door shut behind her. Tomorrow she was going to Asheville. She was going towards something. The movers arrived at 7:15 in the morning, which was earlier than scheduled and later than Brielle had been awake. She had been up since 5, sitting on the floor of the empty apartment with coffee in a paper cup. She had picked up from the lobby vending machine, doing the specific kind of thinking that only happens in empty rooms before sunrise, the kind where there is nothing left to distract you from exactly where you are and exactly what you have decided. She had decided well, she knew that. She held it the way you hold something small but solid, something that doesn't require display to be real. She had spent enough of her life looking for external confirmation of internal truths. She was not going to do that today. She was moving to Asheville, and she was going toward something, and that was enough to know without needing anyone to agree. The movers were efficient and businesslike and spoke mostly to each other in the shorthand of people who do physical work together every day. She liked that. She made them coffee from the last working pod in the machine she was donating to the building's common room, and they thanked her, and they carried her life out of the apartment in brown boxes and furniture wrap, while she stood at the window and watched the street below and felt the past 12 months settle behind her like a door closing. She drove herself to Asheville. 6 hours. She stopped once for gas and a sandwich she ate standing at the hood of her car in a highway rest area in the weak March sun, watching other people move through their own days, a family with 2 small children and a dog who kept wrapping its leash around the father's ankles, an elderly couple walking slowly and in step, a teenage boy eating chips and staring at his phone with the absolute focused vacancy of someone who is exactly where he always is. She watched all of them and felt connected to them in the anonymous way you feel connected to strangers when you are between chapters of your own life. She got back in the car. She drove the rest of the way without stopping. The apartment in Asheville was on the 3rd floor of a converted building in the West End neighborhood, with tall windows and hardwood floors and a kitchen that was slightly too small and a bedroom that was exactly the right size. She had known from the listing photographs that it was right, and walking into it with her own key for the first time confirmed it. It had the specific quality of a space that would hold her without constraining her, which was the only thing she required of a home now. The movers arrived 2 hours after she did. She directed the placement of furniture with the focused efficiency that her colleagues would have recognized immediately, and by 8 o'clock that evening she had a bed and a functioning kitchen and her laptop open on the coffee and the framed photograph Marif of herself on the ordinary Thursday 3 weeks after the weddings, hanging on the wall above the console table in the entryway. She had hung it first. Before anything else, she had put that photograph on the wall of the new apartment before she had assembled a single piece of furniture, because she had decided it was going to be the first thing she saw when she walked in and the last thing she saw when she left. And she wanted to know from the first day that this apartment belonged to a woman who had already been through the worst version of someone else's opinion of her and had come out the other side still fully herself. That night she ordered pizza and called Maris and described every room in detail and listened to Maris say, "Okay, but what color are the walls?" approximately 6 times until Brielle finally said, "Maris, they are white. They are regular white walls. What do you want from me?" And Maris said, "I want texture." "I need texture, get some art," and Brielle laughed. Genuinely and completely for the first time in what felt like a long time. The laugh surprised her, not because she had forgotten how, but because it arrived without effort, without the small lag she had become accustomed to. In the months since the setting, that fraction of a second between the thing that was funny and her ability to receive it. As though the part of her that responded to joy had temporarily gone behind glass. Tonight there was no glass. She ate pizza on her new floor and laughed at Maris, and watched the city lights come through her tall windows and thought, "This is mine, this exact moment, this is mine." Work began the following Monday. The Asheville office of her company was smaller than the Savannah headquarters, a regional satellite that she was being sent to develop, which was the kind of operational challenge she was genuinely good at and had been waiting for without fully knowing she was waiting for it. She walked in on Monday morning and met her team of 11 people, who ranged from a 26-year-old data analyst named Thomas, who wore the same brand of sneakers in 5 different colors, to a 61-year-old office manager named Gloria, who had been with the company for 16 years and had a specific, watchful quality that Brielle recognized immediately as the look of a woman assessing whether the new property was worth respecting. By Wednesday, Gloria had brought her a coffee without being asked, which Brielle understood was the assessment's result. She settled in, she was good at her work and she knew it, and she let herself know it, which was newer than it should have been. She had spent years qualifying her own competence in her head. She was good at this, but she was capable of that, although she could handle this if. She was removing the qualifiers. She was done with the qualifiers. By the end of her first month in Asheville, the office had a reorganized workflow and 2 new processes, and a team that had shifted from politely uncertain to visibly invested. And Gloria had started leaving notes on her desk that said things like, "Thought you should know. Marketing called again and I handled it. You're welcome." She sent Maris a photo of the first note. Maris texted back, "I love Gloria with my whole heart." It was 6 weeks into Asheville on a Tuesday afternoon in late April that she got the call that stopped her mid-stride in the hallway outside her office. Dorian. She stared at his name. She had not heard from him in nearly 3 months. The calls had stopped. The texts had stopped. She had allowed herself to begin assuming that the silence was permanent, that whatever version of moving on he was doing had taken him far enough away that she would no longer have to make the decision of whether to pick up. She stood in the hallway. She picked up. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," he said immediately. He sounded different, not the warm, polished register she had loved, not the cornered, defensive voice she had heard in the garden. Something more depleted than either of those. I found out something and I thought you should know, because you're probably going to hear it from someone else and I didn't want that." "What is it?" she said. A pause. "Your mother and I, whatever it was, it ended badly. It's been over since the wedding, completely over. But she called me last week and it got ugly," he exhaled. "She told me she was thinking about reaching out to you, about trying to explain, and I thought you should know that whatever she tells you, I'm not going to contradict it. I'm not going to try to manage my version of events anymore. You can have all of it, whatever you need." Brielle stood in the hallway. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Another pause. Longer this time. "Because the thing you said at the altar," he said. "About the dress. About not letting us turn it into the day you disappeared." He stopped. "I've thought about that every single day since, and I think I know it doesn't matter now. I know it's too late for it to matter in any way that helps you, but I think I never understood what I actually had until I watched you walk away from it." Brielle was quiet. "I'm sorry, Brielle," he said. "I know what that's worth right now." "Which is nothing. I just needed to say it to you directly." She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about what was true. "I believe that you're sorry," she said finally. "I want you to know that. I believe you mean it. But Dorian, being sorry for the consequence isn't the same as being changed by the understanding of what you did. And I think you might need to sit with the difference between those 2 things for a long time before you're actually safe for someone to love." The silence on his end was total. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think you're right. Okay," she said. She hung up. She stood in the hallway for another moment, holding the phone, taking stock of her own interior the way you take stock after something that used to be able to move you, checking to see what it costs now. It costs something. She wouldn't pretend it cost nothing. But it was not the bone deep, Destabilizing grief it would have been 6 months ago. It was the smaller, cleaner hurt of a scar being pressed real, specific but no longer a wound. She put the phone in her pocket. She walked back into her office. She had a 3 o'clock meeting. It was 2 weeks after Dorian's call, a Thursday in early May. A morning when Brielle arrived at work 20 minutes early, because she had started doing that without meaning to, had started treating her mornings with the kind of deliberate ownership that had once felt like ambition, and now felt simply like life that she first encountered Wesley Arden. Encounter was perhaps too strong a word for what it actually was. She didn't notice him at first, which mattered, she would think later, because it meant nothing was performed about the beginning. He was sitting in the small conference room adjacent to the main office when she walked past, in a meeting with Thomas about the rehabilitation center redesign project that her company was coordinating with an outside architecture and landscape firm. She saw him the way you should see people in peripheral vision, registered but not cataloged. A person in a room, another variable in the day. Thomas knocked on her open office door an hour later. "Do you have 10 minutes? The lead on the rehab center project wants to walk us through the landscape design approach before we finalize the interior coordination. He's got some questions about load-bearing wall placement that affects his outdoor access plan." "Sure," she said. Closing her laptop, she walked into the conference room. Wesley Arden was standing at the table with a rolled set of drawings open in front of him, and a coffee cup he had clearly forgotten about an hour ago, and he looked up when she came in with the specific expression of a person who has been focused on a problem and is momentarily recalibrating to the social dimension of a room. "Brielle Winslow," she said, extending her hand. "Operations Wesley Arden," he said. His handshake was brief and straightforward. "The landscape side of this is going to have some implications for your interior access points. I wanted to talk through it before we lock anything in." "Good," she said. "Let's look at it." They spent 40 minutes in that conference room working through a genuinely complex concept about how the rehabilitation center's outdoor therapeutic spaces would interact with the interior patient flow. And it was 40 minutes of entirely practical conversation, floor plans, and access widths and drainage considerations, the specific requirements of patients using mobility aids, and Wesley Arden was direct, technically precise, and occasionally funny in the low-key, unannounced way of people who aren't trying to be funny, who just have a dry enough view of the world that it surfaces without effort. When they finished, he rolled up the drawings and said, "That was more useful than I expected this meeting to be." "I'll try not to take that personally," Brielle said. He looked at her. "I meant it as a compliment to the process. Thomas told me the coordination on this project had been slow." "It had been," she said. "It isn't anymore." He nodded. He left. Thomas lingered in the doorway for a moment. "He's really good," he said, with the slightly odd quality of a young person who has just spent time with someone genuinely skilled at what they do. Like, really good. He designed the Riverside Park renovation in Portland and the Healing Gardens project at the Children's Hospital in Atlanta. "I'll look at his portfolio," Brielle said. She did look at his portfolio that evening, not because she was thinking about Wesley Arden personally, but because she was thorough, and she wanted to understand the professional she was coordinating with. The work was remarkable, not showy, not a design that announced itself, but deeply considered, clearly built around an understanding of how human beings actually move through and inhabit outdoor spaces. There was a thoughtfulness to it that she recognized as the product of someone who cared about the purpose of the work, not just the aesthetics. She closed the laptop and went to bed. Over the next 8 weeks, she saw Wesley Arden 9 times, all for the project, all professional. He came into the office twice more for coordination meetings, and they talked on the phone 3 times about specific logistical questions. And she visited the site twice while his team was working, and they walked the space together with Thomas and the interior design contractor. Each interaction was exactly what it appeared to be: 2 people doing their jobs well, in coordination with each other, with no subtext that she was looking for or manufacturing. But she noticed things, not the things she had once trained herself to notice about men, the signs of interest, the specific behaviors she had learned to read as indicators of whether she was being found attractive, the inventory she had kept running unconsciously since she was a teenager, and which she had understood in therapy was a survival mechanism built on the foundational belief that being found attractive makes sense. She was done with that inventory. What she noticed about Wesley Arden was different. She noticed that he listened, not the performed listening of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but actual listening, the kind where you can see someone processing what you've said before responding, where the response actually connects to what you said rather than to the point they were planning to make regardless. She noticed that he was direct without being unkind, which was rarer than it should have been and which she valued more than she used to. She noticed that when something was funny he laughed, and when it wasn't he didn't perform a laugh, and that this consistency between his interior and exterior experience was something she had not realized she had been starving for. She mentioned him to Dr. Ferrara in their session the week after the 8th project meeting. "You're smiling," Dr. Ferrara said, which was not nothing coming from a woman who noted things without always saying them. "I noticed someone," Brielle said carefully. "I'm not doing anything about it." I noticed. How does that feel?" "Terrifying," Brielle said. "And also like something I don't want to run from just because it's terrifying." "That's different from how you would have answered that 6 months ago, Doctor." Ferrara said. "I know," Brielle said. "The 9th meeting was the one where things shifted. Though it shifted slowly and without drama, which was entirely consistent with how everything about Wesley Arden operated." They had finished the final coordination walkthrough on the rehabilitation center site, and Thomas had left early because of something with his car, and she and Wesley had ended up walking back through the facility together in the late afternoon, talking about the project, the parts that had worked, the parts that had been harder than expected, the particular satisfaction of seeing something you've worked on become real and functional. At the entrance he stopped. "Do you want to get coffee?" he said. "Not for the project, just coffee." She looked at him. He waited with the easy patience of a man who was asking a genuine question and was entirely prepared to accept either answer. "Yes," she said. They went to a place 2 blocks away and sat at a table in the corner and talked for 2 hours, and the conversation moved the way good conversation moves, not in a straight line, but in a series of connected arcs, each one opening into the next, so that by the end you have covered enormous territory without ever feeling like you went looking for it. They talked about their work, and about what had drawn each of them to it, and about Asheville, which she was still discovering, and which he had been living in for 4 years. They talked about their families in the way adults talk about families when they are old enough to see them clearly with love and complication, and without the need to perform either uncomplicated happiness or uncomplicated grievance. He did not ask about her personal life. She did not volunteer it. When they left, he held the door and then walked with her back to the office building where she had left her car, and at the parking garage entrance he said, "I'd like to do this again." "Okay," she said. "Next week, yes," she said. She drove home. She sat in her apartment and thought about the evening with the specific, calibrated honesty that Dr. Ferrara had been teaching her to apply to her own interior experience, not performing either enthusiasm or caution, but actually checking what was real. What was real was that she had spent 2 hours with a person who had not once made her feel like she needed to be smaller or more careful or less herself. What was real was that his invitation to get coffee had felt like an honest question, and her yes had felt like an honest answer, and that the simplicity of that exchange, the radical, startling simplicity of 2 people saying what they meant to each other, had made her throat tight in a way she hadn't expected. She called Maris. "I went for coffee with someone," she said. A pause. Someone I work with on the rehab center project. Landscape architect. His name." Another pause. Longer. "Okay," Maris said, in the careful voice of a woman who has strong feelings that she is managing expertly. "Tell me," Brielle told her. When she finished, Maris was quiet for a moment. "He asked if you wanted coffee," Maris said. "Just coffee." "Not I know a great place. Let me take you somewhere." "Not a reservation. Just coffee." "Just coffee," Brielle. "And he waited to see what you'd say." "He did, Brielle." Maris' voice had shifted into something softer. That's a person behaving like a person. That's just basic." "I know," Brielle said. "I know it's basic. And I know what it says about me, that it felt significant. I'm working on that, but it felt significant." "That's allowed to feel significant," Maris said. "You're allowed to notice when someone treats you like a whole human being. That's not pathetic. That's just where you are and where you've been. Don't apologize for the noticing." Brielle sat with that. "I'm scared," she said. "Of course you are. I don't know how to do this anymore. I don't know what I'm supposed to trust." "You trust your own read," Maris said firmly. "Which, for the record, is excellent when you use it. Your read on Dorian was right from early on, and you talked yourself out of it. Your read on this one is telling you something different. Listen to it." They had coffee the following week. And the week after, the 3rd time, it was dinner, proposed by Brielle, which she noted to herself with a satisfaction that was quiet but real, because she had always been the one who waited to be asked, and she was done waiting for things she could simply reach toward. Wesley had said yes immediately, without the social calculation of a man who was trying to seem appropriately not too eager. Over the following months, they built something incrementally and without rushing it, which was new for Brielle. She had always moved quickly in relationships, driven by the fear that if she moved slowly, the other person would find something to disqualify her, would look too closely and see the reasons not to. She understood now, with the clarity that therapy and 6 months in Asheville and the general project of actually inhabiting her own life had given her, that the speed had never been about desire. It had been about fear. She was moving slowly now. She was staying in every moment long enough to actually feel it, to actually know what she thought about it, to trust her own accumulating data, rather than overriding it with anxiety. 3 months in, they were sitting on the floor of her apartment one evening. She had cooked, which she was good at and enjoyed, and which she had stopped doing for 2 years because Dorian had kept suggesting restaurants, and she had read that as preference rather than what it was, which was the choice of a man who wanted to be seen in public with a woman but did not want to be domestic with her. She had made pasta from scratch. They had a bottle of wine, and the windows were open, and the city was doing its night sounds, and the evening was the specific, unhurried kind that she had stopped believing was available to her. Wesley said, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Yes," she said. "What happened?" "Before Asheville. You've referenced it a few times at the edges of things, but you've never said directly." She looked at him. She had expected this conversation to feel dangerous when it came. She had rehearsed versions of it in her head with the same preparatory caution she applied to difficult professional situations, mapping the territory, identifying the risk points, having her responses ready. It didn't feel dangerous. It felt like a door she had been standing in front of for 3 months. And he had knocked, and she could open it. She told him. All of it. Not the performed version, not the one optimized to make her sound strong and resolved and already healed. The real version, with the complexity intact, the kitchen at midnight, the tablet, the message, the months of evidence, the morning in the bridal suite, her mother's hands on her face, the envelope, the dress. She told him about the particular damage of her mother's message then. Maybe you chose the wrong Winslow woman, and what did it against the backdrop of years of carefully constructed self-doubt about her body and her worth. She told him about therapy, about Asheville being a choice towards something, not a flight from it, about the photograph Maris had taken that hung in the entryway. When she finished, Wesley was quiet for a moment. He looked at her. "What do you need?" he said, "in order to feel safe with someone again?" She had not expected that question. She had expected sympathy or reassurance, or the particular kind of response that men give when a woman's history is painful, and they want to signal that they are the antidote to it. She had been braced for some version of "I'm not like that," or "you deserve better," or the implicit positioning of himself as the corrective to everything she'd been through. He had asked what she needed, not what he could offer, not what she should know about him, what she needed. As though her answer was the relevant variable, as though the information that mattered was inside her rather than inside his ability to perform a particular kind of reassurance. She felt something in her chest go very still. Honesty, she said, when she could speak, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then, she paused. And time. "I need things to move at the speed they actually are, instead of the speed I'm afraid I should be moving to make sure you don't leave." He nodded. "Okay," he said. "That's it," she said. "What else would there be?" he said. She looked at him. "You're not going to tell me you can do those things? You're not going to—" "You'll see whether I can do them," he said simply. "You don't need me to tell you, you need to see it." She sat with that. She thought about every person who had ever told her who they were instead of showing her. She thought about all the words that had surrounded her in the years before Asheville, words about love and commitment and worth and beauty, and how little of it had been backed by the behavior that made words mean something. She thought about Wesley asking what she needed and then waiting for her answer without filling in the silence. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They finished the wine. She washed the dishes and he dried them, which was something Dorian had never done, not once in 3 years, which she had told herself meant nothing and which she now understood had meant something. The way small, consistent behaviors always mean something about the larger architecture of how a person relates to the people around them. The dishes were done and he was putting on his jacket to leave when he stopped. "Brielle," he said. She looked at him. "The woman you described tonight," he said, standing at that altar, reading those messages out loud in front of all those people, and then putting the ring on the table and walking away. He paused. "I want you to know that I don't think that story is the most important thing about you. But I think it showed something that was already there. Something that doesn't need recovering. It just needs room." She did not say anything for a moment. "That's the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a long time," she said. "It's true," he said. "Kindness is better when it's also true." He left. She stood in her apartment after the door closed. She looked at the photograph in the entryway herself, laughing ordinary, entirely real. She had spent the last year learning to trust her own read. She had spent the last year clearing out the voices that didn't belong inside her head and replacing them, slowly and imperfectly, with her own. Her own read on this was clear. She was not going to run from it. She was going to take the time she had said she needed, move at the speed that was actually honest, and she was going to see what could grow when the ground under your feet was finally, genuinely solid. She turned off the entryway light. She went to bed. She was not afraid. 6 months into Asheville, Brielle stopped counting the months. That was how she knew she was actually living in her life, rather than tracking her recovery from someone else's choices. She had been counting without meaning to 6 weeks since the wedding, 2 months since she left Savannah, 4 months since the first therapy session, 5 months since she stopped checking whether Dorian had tried to reach her again. She had been measuring time the way you measure distance from a disaster, always aware of how far you've gotten from the point of impact, always half-oriented backward even while moving forward. Then one morning in September, she woke up and made coffee and stood at her kitchen window, watching the city begin its day, and realized she had not thought about the wedding in 11 days. Not because she had suppressed it, not because she was avoiding it. Simply because her life had grown large enough that the space the wedding occupied inside it had become proportional to what it actually was, a thing that happened to her, not the thing that defined her. She called Dr. Ferrara that afternoon. "I stopped counting," she said. Dr. Ferrara said, "Tell me what that feels like." "Like I finally live here," Brielle said. "In my actual life. Not in the aftermath of someone else's." There was a warmth in Dr. Ferrara's response that she didn't always allow herself. "That's the work," she said. "That's exactly the work." What Brielle did not say in that session, what she was still turning over privately, still measuring against her own hard-won ability to trust herself, was that she and Wesley had been spending more time together than could be accounted for by the project, which had technically wrapped up in July. The rehabilitation center had opened to quiet institutional ceremony and genuine community enthusiasm, and her company's role in it was complete. And there was no professional reason for her and Wesley Arden to have dinner twice a week or to spend Sunday mornings walking through the River Arts District while he pointed out things she would never have noticed on her own, the way a particular building's facade created an unintentional frame for the mountain view behind it, the way the placement of a bench either invited or discouraged people from stopping, the specific grammar of public space that his work had taught him to read like a language. She had started seeing the world differently through those Sunday mornings. She had started noticing things she had walked past for months without registering. It felt like a gift she hadn't asked for and couldn't entirely account for, which was she was beginning to understand the specific quality of the good things, the ones that arrive quietly and become essential, before you've noticed the transition. Wesley did not press her. This was the thing about him that she kept returning to in the privacy of her own head, kept placing alongside every comparable moment from before and measuring the difference. He did not press, he did not fill silences with implications. He did not use patience as a strategy she had known patient men before. Men who waited with the specific visible effort of someone performing waiting, who radiated the expectation of eventual reward for their forbearance. Wesley simply existed at the pace that was honest for him, and it happened to be a pace that gave her room, and she did not think that was an accident. But she also did not think it was calculated. She thought it was just who he was. She was learning to accept that some people were simply who they appeared to be, and that this was not naivety but clarity. In October, she said yes when he invited her to a Saturday with his sister's family, a thing he mentioned casually, with the easy openness of a man who was not using family as a pressure point or a signal or a milestone to be negotiated, just a person who wanted her in his Saturday. His sister was Maya, 31, a physical therapist with 2 children under 5 and an organizational approach to her household that Brielle recognized immediately as kinship. Maya shook her hand at the door and said, "Wesley talks about you constantly." It's genuinely exhausting with the frank warmth of someone who has decided to like you before you've arrived and is simply confirming it in person. Brielle liked her immediately and completely. The afternoon was ordinary and loud and full of the particular beautiful chaos of small children and adults trying to have conversations around them. Wesley's brother-in-law, a quiet man named Cal who coached high school baseball and had strong opinions about barbecue technique, spent 40 minutes explaining his process to Brielle in the backyard with the passionate specificity of a person who has found someone willing to listen. She listened genuinely because she was interested genuinely, which was a thing she had not always allowed herself the genuine interest in ordinary people being entirely themselves. Driving back that evening, Wesley said, "Maya texted me already." "What did she say?" She said, and I'm quoting directly, "Do not mess this up." Brielle laughed. "Strong feedback," she said. "She's not wrong," he said simply. She looked at his profile in the dark of the car and felt something she did not try to name yet, because naming it felt like rushing it, and she was done rushing things to the finish line before she had actually walked the whole road. But she felt it. She knew what it was. November came, and with it the first real cold and the particular quality of Appalachian autumn that she had not experienced before, the way the mountains held the color longer than the lowlands, the way the air changed character on the elevation, the way the city felt simultaneously smaller and more itself once the tourist season wound down and it was left to the people who actually lived there. She had become one of the people who actually lived there. She had her routines and her preferred coffee shop and her pool schedule and her relationship with Gloria, who had evolved from watchful assessor to something that functioned very much like an office aunt, opinionated, fiercely loyal, and in possession of information about the inner dynamics of the regional office that Brielle considers essential. She had her Sunday mornings. She had Maris on the phone 2 nights a week and in person once a month, because Maris had begun driving up from Savannah with a frequency that had started as support and shifted without comment into simply the natural rhythm of a close friendship conducted across a distance. She had her life, and then, in November, on a Tuesday evening when she was working late and the office was otherwise empty, and her phone rang with a number she recognized immediately and felt settle in her chest like a stone dropping into still water, she answered. Celeste. They had spoken 5 times since the wedding. Each call had been brief and careful, the words chosen with the deliberate care of people walking across ice and testing each step before committing weight. Brielle's had set the terms of those conversations clearly, and Celeste had respected them, which was itself new. Celeste had spent 53 years being a woman who set terms and expected others to accommodate them, and the accommodation had mostly been provided because Celeste was charming and confident, and people found it easier to adjust than to hold firm. Brielle had held firm. Tonight, Celeste's voice was different. Not the careful voice, not the measured performance of accountability voice that Brielle had been listening to across 5 short calls. Something underneath that, something older and less constructed. "I'm in Asheville," Celeste said. Brielle's hand tightened on the phone. "What? I should have asked first. I know I should have asked. I drove up this afternoon and I'm at a hotel on Marymount Avenue, and I'm not asking you to see me tonight. I just wanted you to know I was here. I wanted to tell you in person, even if that just means telling you on the phone from 2 miles away, that I have something I need to say to you, and I've been trying to write it in letters for 6 months, and I can't get it right in writing. I can't make it right in writing." Brielle stood up from her desk. She walked to the window. "Mom," she said. "I know," Celeste said. "I know I don't get to just show up. I know that. If you tell me to drive back tonight, I will drive back tonight, and I won't call again until you're ready." The city was lit outside the window. The mountains invisible in the dark but present. She had learned to feel them even when she couldn't see them. The way you learn to feel the presence of large things. "You drove 6 hours," Brielle said. "Yes. You drove 6 hours to tell me something you couldn't put in a letter." "Yes." Brielle stood at the window for a long moment. She thought about what Dr. Ferrara had said 3 months ago, in a session where they had talked about her mother at length. Dr. Ferrara had said, "Forgiveness is not a gift you give to the person who wronged you. It's a weight you set down so you can move more freely. It doesn't require them to have earned it. It only requires you to decide you're done carrying it." She had not been ready then. She checked herself now. In the specific and honest way she had learned to check herself, taking actual inventory rather than performing either hardness or softness. She was not all the way ready, but she was more ready than she had been. "I'll meet you for breakfast," she said, 7:30. "There's a place called Early Girl on Wall Street. Do you know it?" A pause. Then very quietly, I'll find it. 7:30, Brielle said. Don't be late. She hung up. She sat back down at her desk and stared at her screen for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Wesley. He picked up on the second ring. My mother is in Asheville, she said. A beat. Are you okay? I think so. I'm going to meet her for breakfast tomorrow. She paused. I just needed to say that out loud to someone. Okay, he said. Do you want me to come over? She thought about it. No, she said. I think I need to sit with it tonight. But thank you. Call me after breakfast, he said. I will. She arrived at the restaurant at 7:25. Celeste was already there. She was sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, and she looked up and walked in, and her face did the thing that Brielle had been watching her mother's face do her entire life, the complex, involuntary rearrangement that happens when Celeste Winslow saw her daughter, the specific mixture of love and pride and something that had always lived underneath those things that Brielle had never had a name for, and which she now, at 29, understood was guilt, had probably always been guilt. The guilt of a woman who knew, somewhere below the level of her own honest acknowledgement, that she had not been everything she should have been, and who had channeled that knowledge into performance, the perfect mother act, the devoted parent role, the hands on the face, and the I'm so proud of you, because performance was easier than truth. She looked older, not devastated, not broken, but older in the specific way that consequences age at apples, not dramatically, just incrementally, the way a person looks when they have been living honestly with something hard for long enough that it shows in how they hold themselves up. Brielle sat down across from her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Celeste said, You look good, you look really good. Not I mean that plainly, you look like yourself. More than you did before. More than I've seen in a long time. Thank you, Brielle said. The server came, they ordered, the ordinary ritual of it menus. Coffee, the small decisions of breakfast, created enough structure for the first few minutes that they could find their footing before the real conversation began. Celeste set down her coffee cup. I practiced this, she said. I have been practicing what I want to say to you for 6 months. I wrote it down and then I threw it away because every version of it started with me, with how I felt, with what I was going through. She shook her head. I kept trying to explain myself, and every time I did, I was making it about myself again, and I finally understood that was the problem. That's always been the problem. Brielle listened. I betrayed you, Celeste said, not just with Dorian. I betrayed you before him. I betrayed you every time I told you that your body was beautiful and your worth was not in your size, and then turned around and her voice caught, briefly, then steadied, and measured myself against you. Was jealous of you. Wanted what you had in ways I was ashamed of and couldn't admit. So I turned them into something else, something I could dress up as concern or advice or love. The restaurant was filling with the morning sounds of an ordinary Tuesday. Brielle heard all of it at the periphery and none of it at the center, where her mother was sitting across from her and telling the truth for what felt like, in the most important ways, the first time. When Dorian said those things about you, Celeste said, I had a choice. I could have defended you. I could have told him he was wrong. I could have told him that if he was looking at my daughter and seeing something to criticize, he was looking at her wrong and he should get out before he did any more damage. She pressed her lips together. Instead, I competed. I used your insecurity as a playing field. And that is the thing I have to live with, not the affair. The message, the 4 words. Brielle looked at her mother. She felt the grief of it, clean and real, without the fury on top of it that had been there for most of the last year. The fury was not gone, but it had burned down to something more manageable, something that left room for the grief underneath, which was always, she understood, the deeper thing. Why did you come to Asheville? She said. You could have said that on the phone. Because you needed to see my face when I said, Celeste said. Because I needed you to see that I'm not performing this. I have spent 53 years performing things. I know what that looks like. This isn't that. Brielle looked at her mother's face. She looked for the performance. It wasn't there. What was there was a woman in her mid-50s who had driven 6 hours to sit in a corner booth in a city she had never been to before and tell her daughter the truth without a safety net of deflection or self-justification, and who was sitting with the specific stillness of someone who has said the real thing and is now waiting, without manipulation, for whatever comes next. I'm not ready to forgive you, Brielle said. I want to be honest about that, I know, Celeste said. But I'm less not ready than I was, Celeste nodded. She did not reach across the table, she did not push. She sat with what she'd been given with the careful restraint of a woman who understood she did not get to determine the pace of this. Can I ask you something? Brielle said. Anything, Dorian. Is it completely over? Celeste's expression shifted into something Brielle had not expected, not pain, not defensiveness, but a kind of exhausted clarity. It never started, really, she said. I mean, what I thought it was and what it actually was were completely different things. I thought it was, she paused, choosing words carefully. I thought it was being chosen. I thought it was proof that I was still worth choosing. And it was neither of those things. It was a man who used me as a way to feel less guilty about his own choices, and I let him because I wanted too badly to believe it was something else. Have you talked to anyone? Brielle asked. Professionally? I started seeing a therapist in July, Celeste said. Her name is Dr. Marks. She has no patience for my nonsense, which is apparently what I needed. Despite everything, despite the entire complicated weight of the breakfast and the conversation and the 600 miles of distance between the women they had been a year ago and the women sitting in this corner booth right now, Brielle felt something shift in her face. Good, she said. That's good, Mom. Celeste looked at her daughter. Are you happy? She said. Here, in Asheville. Brielle thought about it the way she thought about everything now, actually, honestly, without the overlay of what the answer was supposed to be. Yes, she said, I think I genuinely am. Is there someone? Celeste asked. Carefully, without pressure. Just a mother asking a question and being willing to hear either answers. Brielle looked at her. There might be, she said. It's early, and I'm doing it differently this time. Differently how? Slowly, Brielle said. Honestly, without needing it to be proof of anything. Celeste nodded. She didn't ask more. She seemed to understand that more was not hers to ask for yet. They stayed for another hour. The conversation moved into smaller things: Brielle's work, the rehabilitation center project, the city, Renee and how she was doing, the ordinary connective tissue of a family relationship reassembling itself one careful thread at a time. It was not the conversation they used to have, which had been easy and warm and built on a foundation that had turned out to be less solid than it appeared. This was harder and more deliberate and in its own way more real, because every word was chosen rather than assumed. Every moment of warmth was earned rather than inherited. When they stood to leave, Celeste reached out and touched her daughter's arm. Just briefly, just the lightest contact, asking nothing, offering itself and ready to be withdrawn. Brielle did not move away. Drive safe, she said. I will, Celeste said. She started to say something else, then stopped herself. What? Brielle said. I was going to say I love you, Celeste said. And then I thought, I've said that 100,000 times, and I want it to mean something different now. I want it to be something I earn, not something I just say. Brielle looked at her mother. Say it anyway, she said quietly, and then earn it. Celeste's eyes filled. I love you, she said. I know, she said. Go home, Mom. She watched her mother walk to her car. She stood on the sidewalk until the car pulled into traffic and disappeared. Then she called Wesley. He picked up before the second ring. How are you, he said. Complicated, she said, and also okay. Both of those things at the same time, that's allowed, he said. I know. She started walking toward the office. She drove 6 hours to say she was sorry. And she meant it. And I don't know yet what that means for us, for what we can build, but it means something. It's a beginning. Yeah, he said. It sounds like one. She walked for half a block in silence that felt comfortable rather than empty. Wesley, she said. Yeah, thank you for the question. The one you asked me months ago. What do you need to feel safe? I've been thinking about it since. Have you figured out the answer? I've been living the answer, she said. Which I think is better. He was quiet for a moment. Then come over tonight, I'll cook. She smiled. Yes, she said. That evening changed something, though neither of them named it while it was happening. They ate and talked, and there was a point when the conversation went quiet, and the quiet was the comfortable kind, and Wesley looked at her across the table and said, without particular drama, without rehearsal, without the careful positioning of a man, but strategic declaration, simply said, because it was true, and he had decided to say true things, I'm in love with you. I don't need you to say anything, I just needed you to know. Brielle looked at him. She felt the words land in the specific internal way that true things land, not like a performance of emotion but like a fact arriving, something that required her to simply sit with it and let it be real. I know, she said. He smiled. I mean, I'm not in a hurry, he said. I know you're not, she said. That's part of why I know I can say it back. She held his gaze. I love you too. I wanted to say it when I actually meant it fully and not before, and I mean it fully. He reached across the table and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with the performed tenderness of someone who is auditioning to be a good partner. Just took her hand the way you take the hand of someone you mean to stay next to. She let him. Spring came again, the first spring since Savannah, her first complete year in Asheville, and she marked it not as the anniversary of the worst thing that had happened to her, but as the point at which she could see clearly how much distance she had covered in 12 months. She and Wesley had built something real and specific and entirely their own, defined not by urgency or fear or the need to prove anything to anyone, but by the simple accumulation of honest days. He proposed on a Thursday evening in April. No crowd, no performance, no grand gesture designed for an audience. They were in her apartment, which had become as much his by presence as hers by lease, and he was washing the dishes and she was drying them, the same ordinary division of labor that had become one of the small, steady rhythms of their life together. And he turned off the water and dried his hands and turned to her and said, "I want to marry you. Whenever you're ready, however you want to do it. I just want you to know that's where I am." She looked at him. She looked at the man who had asked what she needed to feel safe and then spent a year proving by every action that he could be trusted with the answer. The man who had never once made her feel that her body was a problem to be accommodated, who had never offered her acceptance as though it were a gift he was bestowing, rather than simply a natural baseline of how people are supposed to treat each other. The man who washed the dishes and meant what he said and moved at the speed that was honest and had loved her by showing her rather than telling her, until the telling was just the confirmation of something already entirely real. "Yes," she said, "not because I need this to be proof of anything. Not because being chosen by you makes me worthy. I already know I'm worthy. I know you do," he said. "Yes," she said again, clearer, complete. "That's my answer." "Yes," he kissed her. She put her hands on either side of his face and kissed him back in the kitchen of the apartment she had moved into, alone and filled, slowly and deliberately, with the life she had chosen for herself. Their wedding was on a Saturday in September, 8 people, an outdoor ceremony in the garden of a house in the mountains outside Asheville that belonged to Wesley's family, and that she had loved from the first time she saw it. Mara stood beside her. Maya stood beside Wesley. The officiant was a woman Brielle had found herself who had a quiet humor and a quality of genuine attention that made the ceremony feel like a real thing rather than a performance of one. She wore a simple ivory dress, not the dramatic gown she had worn in Savannah, with all its weight and symbolism, and the long shadow of everything she had carried through it. Something entirely different, light, easy, exactly herself. She had tried it on once and not needed to try on anything else. When she stood in front of the mirror before the ceremony, Maris was behind her and they looked at each other's reflections. "You okay?" Maris said. "Yes," Brielle said. "You sure, Maris?" She met her friend's eyes in the mirror. "I am completely, entirely, 100% sure." Maris pressed her lips together to hold back something that wanted to be tears. "Your dad would have loved him," she said. Brielle felt it move through her. That particular, specific grief, the one that no longer devastated her but never fully left, that had become part of her rather than something she carried separate from herself. "I know," she said. "I know he would." The ceremony was 20 minutes. When the officiant asked whether Brielle took Wesley as her husband, she looked at the man standing beside her, this quiet, direct, entirely honest man who had asked what she needed, and then answered the question with a year of his life, and she said, "I do." Then, after one small breath with 8 people in the mountains as witnesses, "But I chose myself first." Wesley heard it and smiled, not surprised. She had told him once what she had said at the altar in Savannah, and he had simply nodded, and she had loved him quietly for understanding immediately why it mattered without needing it explained. The 8 people who were there would remember it. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true after, when the small celebration had wound down and the last guest had gone, and they were sitting together on the back porch in the September evening. Wesley said, "How do you feel?" She thought about the woman who had stood in a hotel bathroom 13 months ago and told her reflection that Dorian had chosen exactly the right Winslow woman. She thought about the kitchen at midnight and the tablet with its screen glowing in the dark and the message she had read and never been able to unfread. She thought about the dress and the altar and the envelope and the ring she had placed sans a ceremonial toll and the 250 people who had risen to their feet as she walked away. She thought about Asheville and the framed photograph in the entryway and the swimming pool at 6 in the morning and Gloria's notes and Sunday mornings in the River Arts District and breakfast with her mother and the slow, patient, entirely honest building of something real. She thought about what it had cost. She thought about what it had built. "I feel like myself," she said, completely and without apology. "For the first time in a very long time, I feel exactly like myself." Wesley put his arm around her. She leaned into him. The mountains held the dark around them, solid and permanent and entirely indifferent to the small human drama of one woman's long year, of the worth she had been searching for in other people's eyes had always been living in the one place. No one could give it to her and no one could take it away. Inside herself, exactly where it had always been. And for Brielle Winslow, who had stood in her mother's hallway and heard the truth and survived it, who had walked into a garden of 250 people and told it, who had moved 600 miles toward her own life and built it from the ground up, one honest day at a time, that was not the ending of the story. It was the proof that the story had always been hers.